very artistic.
Usually the opposite. Rams next.
No one's heard, then I'll go.
I texted her, but
My first part done.
Okay.
So easy.
No, nothing, Nick?
No.
Okay, then we'll get started. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 30th, 2024 special meeting of the Fairfield Board of Education. Call the meeting to order at 7:30 p.m. With us this evening is Mr. Krasnoff, Mrs. Flynn, Mr. Murphy, myself, Mrs. Jacobson, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Mazzucchelli, and Mr. Peterson, as well as Superintendent Mr. Tostani. If everyone could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please, Mr. Tostani.
Sure, I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, moving on to business items, discussion of Dwight feasibility studies and updates from Silver Petroselli and Associates. And Mr. Tostani, I don't know if you like, it would be a good idea to just have our guests come up, however you
Yeah,
give an overview.
yeah, sure. Appreciate everyone making time tonight to come. I know this was short notice for many, and we had a great facilities meeting today, and I thought having a representative from Silver Petroselli to help guide and give some explanation of the feasibility studies that were submitted regarding Dwight was extremely enlightening, and I think having him here tonight in person is going to help fill in some blanks with some much needed information. And I think it brings to light a lot of the things that we had as in terms of assumptions that now we can say for certain. And we have our
Just
guest
want to
here
come up
today.
and introduce yourself, and kind of, we'll do the same what we did earlier, is just like go through the first one and just a high level, then we can ask some questions and then we can go through the second one.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Again, David Stein with Silver Petroselli and Associates, architects, engineers, interior designers. Good to be back. I know there's some familiar faces from years back. As you know, our firm worked in town for many years, Stratfield Elementary, Sherman, and Mill Hill was the last big project that you may remember from. And thank you for asking us to be a part of the feasibility study here, in which, again, as you know, this is initial feasibility study. There's a lot to predict early and help guide you along the way to be able to make informed decisions related to the best use of your property, right? And that's what we try to encapsulate here in a high level without, we really haven't put pen to paper per se to really get down to the level of detail, but looking at state space standards as a guideline begins to allow you to at least shape the building. Look at the overall square footage. Dollars are associated with square footage, so those two essentially go hand in hand in these early planning stages for you, along with just looking at your overall infrastructure and how the site circulation and some of the challenges that go along with the full building construction, and then how that reimbursement rate gets sort of brought into the equation of onboarding these type of projects. So with that kind of intro, I'm here to answer any questions, and I'm sure some may have come up earlier, but please, happy to dive into it.
All right, why don't we start with the first one, and if anyone has any specific questions on the first one, or even if you want to reiterate anything from earlier today, I'll just open it up to the floor. Mr. Krasnoff.
again, thank you for coming. I apologize if some of these questions are repetition of earlier. There's a lot of more people here, a lot more ears, and it might be good for some of the repetition. First off, I would just like you, if you can, just go over a little bit of detail like you did in our meeting, in terms of what you looked at and just a brief overview of the project itself, kind of like you did for us. And then afterwards, I'll have a few follow-up.
Yeah, sure. So our approach of doing a comparison between building new compared to renovate is new. The first thing, if we just talk about building a new building, the first piece we have to see is, can we fit this? Try to do a fit study to see whether or not the property at least has enough room to place a building, knowing that there's going to be a bunch of other constraints that we can't do. Through our evaluation, the upper fields with on it sort of a plateau, a flat area, is really a great position to be able to build a building from ground up. Okay. The separation of where that new building would be in relationship to the existing building, it's a good distance away. So there's enough that we would visualize that a contractor can mobilize and do work with the keeping the operations ongoing in the school and operation. So when we first looked at this, we said, there's possibilities there. We then started looking at just how the building functions in terms of where electrical services enter the building, where your septic system is, because you're on a septic system. And that's one area that we determined is somewhat problematic with what you currently have in place. And then there's going to need to be a new system installed for the new building. Okay, so, and where that goes is sort of to be determined. Some of the challenges that we saw with our proposal of placing the building at that upper part of the ball fields at that plateau is we would somehow need to tier and work with the topography to create room for parking and to create a reasonable bus loop and parking area or parent drop off. Just like Mill Hill and your other schools, it's key to have a long enough queue for both of those to work. And those also need to be, separate. So, the two vehicles essentially don't cross paths in any way. Our plan began to show that, but by doing that, we knew we would need to basically regrade a significant amount of that upper area to do so. Looking at just the geology maps and so forth, we haven't done any soil borings. We would expect you would be dealing with some type of rock removal, rock blasting, chipping, or so forth to basically shave away and create these plateaus of parking along with that. How much is that? Can't be determined at this point, but we at least put a placeholder in the site number. That was comparable to what we did at Mill Hill. We had some of that at our parking storage. Not as extensive as it would be here at Dwight. So the septic system and just the site improvement piece of it is probably the biggest challenge. Definitely something that can be overcome. There's costs that associated with that, but that's probably the two kind of risk items that we see. The building itself, it could basically its shape, its form. So it's just the imagination of your architect to be able to create a very concise piece. We sized the building really just aligning it with space standards that you have from the state of Connecticut. And so you're maximizing as much as your reimbursement as possible. That may change as you begin to design things and get into the nuances that you may need to look at certain things that you just think programmatically meet your current educational mission, but you're going to still stay around that piece of it. So that's where we looked at with the new piece of the building. Looking at what we would call renovate as new, now comparing it to keep the existing building in place, but renovate it to a fashion that's either as new or determined as like new. What essentially that means is that we need to endorse that whatever we're touching and removing, it has longevity of like 20 years. Now, some of that's pretty easy to achieve. If we ripped off the roof and put a new roof on, you have a warranty of 20 years, you're going to make that work. But there may be some other things that are in the ground, existing piping, cast iron piping, things like that. We need to do some due diligence to make sure, does this still have another 20 years of life in it? If not, the recommendation would be you would need to remove it and put in new piping, for example. So with that, there's only so much that you could see now of what needs to be removed. Now, you got to keep a good portion of your building intact. You can't just knock it all down. You actually have to keep about, let's just say 60-75% of the main part of the building, mainly the walls, the roof structure. You're changing windows, envelope issues, flooring you're replacing, fit and finish is being pulled out, and your mechanical systems, right? Most of those are aged with what we can see. And if you're going to project out 20, 30 plus years, you're going to want a brand new system to be instituted. So that's all achievable. Renovate as new projects are common. We know enough about your building in terms of the environmental abatement items that either have been already addressed over time. You test your buildings or have reports on your existing building already. But what are the challenges? The challenges are you're working with what you already have. The building was built in a very compact way. So we try to fit all that ductwork for heating, cooling, ventilation, air. Where do we fit those ductworks in? It's a real challenge. So most likely some of that goes to the roof. And by doing that, we're now changing the structure a bit to accommodate all of them. How do you do that in an occupied scenario? Complicated. Can be very complicated. We had a bit of an advantage at Mill Hill because it was during COVID and we weren't fully occupied. So we were able to, and we were also adding a good amount of additions, classroom additions. So we created this big amount of swing space. You don't need additional space. You need to right size your space at Dwight. So it's not like we're creating 10 classrooms that we could swing a whole, 2 grade levels in and start working around the building. You're a bit more compact. So how do you do the abatement work that could really only take place during the summer? Can't do that during occupied time. You're dealing with a lot of challenges. As the nature of a renovation projects, there's just those unforeseen conditions that you don't find until you get there. And those are things that all could be addressed and solved, but you're doing that real time. You're doing that while contractors are already there and wanting to do work, and you need to hold them up while we figure out how to fix it. That costs money. And that's not dollars that you could predict now. You put it in contingency, but those are extra, you're spending more money. There's a multiplier that goes along with that type of work. So, but renovate as new projects are often there. There's, in theory, these are sustainable, right? You're not knocking down an entire building, putting it into a landfill. You're keeping what you could keep and you're building upon new. So there's a sustainability that goes along with renovate as news, but there's a risk. There's definitely a risk that goes along with buildings like yours. You have some accessibility challenges or non-compliant issues that would need to be addressed as part of a renovation. There's other code compliance items that right now would be technically, and it's acceptable, they're called existing non-conforming issues, but once you embark on a project like that, you're triggered into everything that is, that the code predicts as of today. Renovate as new project will take longer to do because in some cases you're surgically removing things and you're putting things back in new, where a ground up building is just sort of somewhat like a Legos. You're just kind of going it in sequence and, working in a much more organized manner. So we would predict that the new construction would be somewhere about a 2-year from start to finish roughly. And that a renovate as new could potentially be, somewhat longer depending on that. Now note that the new portion, the way that we would perceive it being phased is you build the new building, you create it in a way where you then move everybody into that new building. You would then knock down the old building and then the remaining site improvement pieces would balance off where that old building was positioned. So that may take another 6 months to kind of get that demolition and demobilization and final site work done. With all these projects, you would want to start, well, the renovate is new portion, you wouldn't start until, say, June 30th, right? Right after school that's when you start. The new, you have the fields, you can start in the spring. You could start, we have fairly warm winters. It's possible to get started and start digging foundations even all the way through. So that gives you a bit more flexibility, where renovate is new projects are really guided on a timeline of, finish June 30th. Our completion is always going to be ready by August for that fall school year. So that would have to be sort of planned in all of this. Design for both can take just the same amount of time. So I wouldn't predict design would take longer from one to the other necessarily. Probably fairly close that you could plan the two, and those usually planning for projects of this scale are about a year from concept all the way through by the time you would end up bidding the project and so forth. So I think I tried to hit on enough, but I'm sure I missed it.
David, I just wanted to ask one question, because I know when we talked this afternoon in the committee meeting, the question came up. But in the renovate is new, it was impossible, given the layout of the current building and the work that we've done, to occupy the space at all.
It really is it's a risky proposition. You would have to take the very small bites, and based on doing all the mechanicals, that's pretty hard to do. To do that, you would have to build a brand new mechanical room somewhere else while the existing one is operational, and try to sort of work your way around by taking things offline and building new. With that would escalate your costs significantly. So you are correct. I mean, the best way of doing a renovate as new project is to an unoccupied renovation. Okay, unless you had a significant amount of extra classrooms that you can swing an entire grade level or two out. But you're limited by your space. So where would that swing space go to? Some schools have tried to use portables, and just move them into portables. Well, portables are extremely expensive. We need to still bring those up the code, even though they're temporary structures. But I need to make them handicap accessible. I need to fully sprinkler those buildings. I need to have fire alarms. I need to make them ADA accessible. So, once we start doing that, we're spending, you could spend a few $1 million on 10 classrooms to be able to do that. So much more cost effective if you're able to move the student population out for that period of time. That allows the contractors to own the site, do their work, and it would be the shortest period of renovation as possible.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I have a few. So thank you again for that. That helped with a lot of the questions.
Sure.
We're gonna ask. I do want to circle back to some of the things that we discussed in our meeting this afternoon. In terms of some hurdles with both projects. So I guess we'll start with the new build. It sounds like a lot of the big hurdles right now is the unknowns in terms of the ground, where things can possibly go. So there will be some costs obviously associated to find a little bit more out on that,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Then onto the renovation piece.
David, I'm sorry. You're saying added costs in addition to what's in here? Sorry for the clarification.
From what I understood, most of the costs are associated in here, but that would be kind of why we're asking for the seed money. We really can't give a definitive final cost, or at least they can't, without knowing the topography layout, what kind of retaining walls we may need, what location it is. So that's what we understood this afternoon. Is that correct? There's a few moving pieces that just need to be.
Yeah, there definitely are. So, looking at our renovation costs, we had a placeholder of, for site work. we need to do some additional due diligence in there that will rule out exactly what the quantities of rock will be, how big this, what are the soil conditions, what things we need to amend in terms of those soils. So that will better shape your number early on. So this is a very high level study. My point was that as you go along, you're gonna have more accuracy on those numbers and you're gonna be able to separate them. Now we're giving you big lump sum numbers.
You're talking about the D&D phase. Is that normally when you do that?
The design and engineering, is that what you mean by D&E phase? Yes, you would do that. You would do that at your next, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to know.
You're good. It was actually a perfect segue, because the unknown costs on the renovation, as we got into them, we started digging, started possibly exponentially growing. One concern I brought up was how some of it is subterranean or basement style, and that certain walls lean up against dirt. My personal concern was that sometimes it becomes a moisture or structural issue. And you can elaborate more how that's an unknown until we get in there. But if we were to have to move or regrade it, it becomes difficult because of the space constraints we have. Is that correct? You can maybe elaborate it better for everybody.
Yeah, so as part of the renovate is new, we have our exterior walls we're gonna keep in place. The corridor walls are bearing walls themselves. So, between those classrooms, trying to right size those as needed. You're sort of limited. You're not gonna, if you needed to gain 5 feet, you're not gonna move that exterior wall out 5 feet. That exterior wall also sits up against some of the existing topography that's there, how that foundation was constructed, how it's waterproof, so forth. There needs to be some studies to determine how that's constructed and to what limitations could you sort of fix any of those items in terms of moisture infiltration and such, because that ties directly into air quality and so forth. So we're trying to, through this renovation, we want to make sure your envelope is tight. So you're going to need to do some additional evaluation. Built into the numbers is we included a 5% construction contingency. There's also an owner's contingency. We have a separate contingency to what we're showing on our estimate now that is for those exact items. We need to better define that. Right now, our calculation was 5% of the subtotal of all those other costs. So to your question, what you're asking is, yes, those need to be better defined, and it shouldn't just be based on a percentage. It should be evaluated tonight.
And the one more big question I have, and I had you kind of go over it as well in the meeting, to kind of summarize everything you've looked at and knowing the price differential, the ability to build new on the site, and the risk and exposure we have to the renovation and how big the renovation project was. In your professional opinion, does it make sense to go down the renovation path, or are we better off not even going that direction and with the newer build?
Yeah, so there's a lot of risk with the renovation piece. The difference that changes is your reimbursement rate, right? The state gives you 16.07% for new, you're at 26.07. Those are for 2025 numbers. That's what begins to make a difference and brings the two closer.
Well, the reason I asked
But
that,
your risk is new.
if you feel the renovation is gonna be the same or exceed the cost of the new, a lot of times we can make the case for the high reimbursement. So that's part of it.
That, yes.
Do you feel that this renovation could exceed and we could prove possibly to the state that it makes way more sense to build new in your professional opinion?
Yes, mainly because of the limitations of the existing. Right now, you come in, there's some steps that go up to your main level within your space. Trying to navigate that to fit all your mechanical systems within that. The size classrooms that are already there, you're not going to be able to kind of right size them in an easy way, I think is going to determine the complexity of that. Whereas a new, I think will be able to control more of the unknowns.
Let me ask a quick follow-up to that question. Are you contending that we might be able to actually convince the state to give us the higher reimbursement rate?
Mr. Lee.
I think, being on these committees before, and members of the sport committees and members of the audience, I want to caution though that the one thing we can't control is actually the reimbursement rate, right? Anything the state can do, we can try and convince them, we may have the right, we're not going to get it. Or we may get it. The thing that concerns me on a very basic level is if we do a renovation, yes, Mill Hill, Holland Hill, all the committees that I've done, we've had that swing space when something's been built. You can move those kids in. We don't have that luxury here. First of all, we're not building the 10 extra classrooms to swing these kids into. So you actually do have to figure out where you're gonna put them, whether it's or somewhere else. So the money you're gonna spend on that alone, right? It's just an added, I always say those at meetings, you always hear only. Well, those onlys add up. When you do that, that's a couple of million, we're gonna assume. When you're doing renovation inside that school, those teachers have to pack up those classrooms. They can't keep their books and everything, all the stuff in the air. That's another added charge. And those only start adding up because then you gotta store it somewhere off-site. Whether it's on our school property or not, those shipping containers to store it, and we've experienced that with Mill Hill and stuff. To Mr. Tastani's shock today that we moved the old furniture out to put them back in. Right? He was surprised we even do that. So that storage space, eventually all those things that we're looking at add up that you can use towards something for a rebuild, right? Or a new build, I'm sorry, not a rebuild, a new build. So those are some of the factors, right? We know that you can build that vehicle renovation, have kids in the school. We've done that at Holland Hill, but again, we've had that swing space. We don't have that luxury there. And then you put those portable ends like Mr. Petroselli said, take the portables, sprinklers, security, electricity, ADA, all the above. It does add up. And when you add that up, plus everything else, that's a nice chunk of savings that you could be using towards a new building.
Ms. Thorne.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I had a chance to a little bit to listen to the facilities meeting as well, so it was very helpful. I've heard the word luxury and gift, and I heard that during the meeting as well. And in the document, it's the most appropriate place for the proposed building is the top field where it's flat. In your work, even in Fairfield and other surrounding districts, how often do you have an opportunity like this where you have a perfectly flat location to build a building while kids are still occupying the old one?
Yeah,
Is that something you find often?
no, I think that's rare. You know, most schools do have a adjacent ball field, but it's usually the size of a little league or half of soccer. You actually have a fairly big flat piece of property that's there. And it's also separate. It's not directly adjacent. So I do consider that to be
Rare?
to be rare. There are some other, there are other properties that are town owned. I know we did a study in Westport for long lots. We're not the final architect with that, but we did an early study that looked at that. There were some community gardens that you may know is fairly controversial and so forth. So usually, that's usually what you have is some other space, but it's not directly related. The Board of Ed or own, part of the board.
And then just for the renovate is new, because there was a lot of discussions about portables and displacement. What is your professional opinion on a time frame for that? The renovate is new.
It most likely we elongate from a new, it's probably about 6+ months longer.
So like in totality, how long would that be?
Well, the question is this occupied or unoccupied?
Unoccupied.
Unoccupied?
You're renovating as new, how long do the students need to be out of the building? How long do you need to do the portables? And if you were to have to move children?
It's probably close to the same as build.
So how long is that?
2 years.
2 years. So 2 years of relocation of students if you were to renovate
And it could be a
for
long,
location as new,
if it was occupied, it would be.
elongated even further. Okay.
All right, Mr. Gerb.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't have the luxury, but I'm the first,
I see.
ex officio. And I was just curious, when you look at the site and the site work up on the field, is there a way to prioritize works that you know what you're getting into? Like, can you do borings first for X amount of money to see what it is you're getting into? Would that possibly be the first step? Or you move to the next step of actually doing the full design?
Yeah, I think there's a few parallel opportunities to do here. So soil borings are definitely one that would determine not only for the footings and foundations of what we encounter. It would also be for the pavement, parking and drive aisle areas to rule out the amount of traffic that we may encounter. Along with exploring where this new septic system would go. So perk tests and so forth. Because the existing septic system would not be able to be reused for the new build. And we also need to determine where what's called a reserve area or a secondary, in theory, if the new one 20 years went down, you have a room for a secondary one to go in its place. So that due diligence needs to start in.
One of the frustrating things about a project like this is all the different moving parts and all the potential pitfalls. So have you ever seen on a project actually doing that work first before you decide to move before you commit?
Yeah, I mean, a true schematic design phase will get you to a point where you will have more clarity with that scenario. You'll also be able to, you can bring in your construction manager at that time to start looking at the site logistics piece and adding true value to the project. So yes, I think your investment would be take it to a point of schematic design, or what's called design development. You take it to a certain point where you invest in design only, and you're not committing to the full construction dollars, but that will give you more clarity. And you could do that in certain steps.
Right, so in terms of finding out the true potential barriers or big cost elements to this, like the borings and, whatever work you need to do to know what the issues are with septic, that's just a portion of. So one of the frustrations, I think, for me is looking at it appears that if you're asking for, not your group is asking for X number of millions of dollars, it appears to be like an all or nothing, like we're going for it with this project. But it's scary when you think of that, when you don't know what you're going to hit in terms of ledge and things like that. So do you have a sense for how it's kind of costs are associated with those initial work you need to do to see how difficult the project is?
Let's see. So in the renovator's new portion, you were showing that just overall design fees are at about 6%, or around 2.5 million. You would, for a schematic design piece, I think you would only invest probably about 200,000 in that first initial study.
Right, okay.
So from there, you invest, that will allow you to do that initial due diligence. You'll be able to now look at the shape of the building. You'll start to be able to put some better numbers to it. And you could rule out some of those items that we are concerned with. You could take that sort of in sequential step-by-step way.
And could I ask Angela, if it would be okay to ask, is that one way forward to potentially get 200,000 and see what we're looking at in terms of the site?
I do have a quick follow-up to it, just from something.
I think he said 200 on the renovation. Do this.
Or for both, like, because for the renovate, you need to do it for that 9,000 square foot section in terms of sewer and septic. And for the new one, you need to do it for the whole site. So just to get that those variables, sort of nail them down a little bit before you make a decision. Because we're looking at two very preliminary, and I know you did this on a shoestring or for nothing, whatever it was, but you're looking at close to a $20 million difference in costs. For 20 million, then you need to, if that indeed is realistic, which I know it's just, we're pulling numbers out of the air, but if it is indeed realistic, then you might, along with this other information about how difficult the sites are, you then make a determination about how much money you have available for alternatives. If you decide to go another direction, like packing up the school or moving somewhere else, like those things are they're not just convenience, but they're also dollar, questions. And if you have 20 million, you can do a lot with that. So we need to nail down the size of what we're talking about in terms of costs and variables. So my question here is the big variable for the for the septic and for the site, all this stuff. What is the amount of money it would take to nail down what the issues are that we're actually looking at before we design a building?
Sorry, can I just ask for clarification, Mr. Gerber? Where are you getting the $20 million difference?
I have two studies here. One is 19 million more than the other. So
Just for Dwight, you mean?
for renovate versus new.
You renovate with the ECC.
Yeah, renovate
Oh.
plus ECC versus renovate plus 9,000 square feet. I mean, that's what these two are, the different.
Make sure I understood what you were talking about.
Yeah, so that's what we're looking at. That's what anyone who has these two reports is looking at. So that the big question is what are the actual variables here?
Just to clarify, I think there might be some confusion. When we ask for seed money, we don't get the seed money and say, okay, design us a building. We go through the phases and we go back from conceptual design, schematic design. And that schematic design is where he mentioned where we're going to do the borings, do the ground testing. Then once we get to that point, they can come back with a report and say, yes, everything is looking good. We're still looking fine. And a good example of this is the air conditioning projects that we're currently doing. We had the schematic design numbers where we got our original funding for. Then we got conceptual numbers. Then we got the schematic design numbers where we were probably May is when they came out. And now we're at those design development numbers where we've locked them even more. So it's not just once we get the seed money, we design a building. There's a bunch of steps and reports and to get to that point.
Yeah, I get it. But what I'm looking at from the ask that I see is that you're asking for money to look at one way forward, whereas there are maybe different ways forward, and you don't want to lose time if one way turns out to be a lot more than you think it is, and then you would want to make sure that you understood the other possible ways as well. So why don't you, can we do an incremental approach to see what the risks are in two or three different approaches?
Can I follow up with that? What would you want to see on the renovate side?
On the renovate side, I think there should be a little bit better understanding of what that site work is for the 9,000 square feet and what the cost would be for the septic, because I think in this description, you have to connect that septic to, right? There's a new section that would require a new septic connection. And then the other one, you've got all the issues with that septic. So if we know a little bit better what those risks are and costs, you'd be able to nail down the potential cost better.
Is there a way, in terms of for the renovate piece, some of the known risks that we were talking about, like the foundation, how the HVAC could be possibly retro commissioned into the building, some of those higher risk items, the abatement pieces, as a part of this preliminary process?
Yeah, so what I think I'm hearing is, to take what we've done and advance that to a schematic design for the two scenarios. So you have much more detail to do a side-by-side comparison.
But so in schematic design, does that mean someone's going to do the borings and all that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
And just.
But you're doing that based on, there may be some borings that are associated just with the new build in that location. You're also then gonna be investing in doing some borings down near the existing building. And, so you're gonna get a more developed report and more accurate costs associated with that.
Okay, Mr. Isa, did you want to go?
Yeah, I have a few questions. So Mr. Gerber kind of highlighted some of my initial thing, and what I was saying, what I wanted to ask was, so traditionally, Mr. Papa George, we use a percentage to get our seed money, right? So we're using a percentage of the proposed new build with ECC to get to that number. And my question was gonna be a little bit like what was asked was, how much of that, I don't have it in front of me, the 3.1, what was the ask? 3.1. So let's just say 3.1 million. What percentage of that would it take to do this, to the schematic portion? I mean, you mentioned like 200, but realistically, what are we looking at?
I was looking at, probably about 15% of the overall, of your overall ask, so that's where I was coming. I was looking at 2.5 million, if I said around 200,000, 10%, between 10 and 15% of the total design effort in that first phase due diligence, which is considered.
Of each? So you're talking 400 or 500?
Well, I think you would scale some of that schematic back, and knowing that you're now doing a comparative study, can you do a reasonable study for that, I think.
So realistically though, we're talking about millions to get the comparative studies as well as what we would normally do for schematic design.
No, what I'm saying is the question that's being asked is, can you take this to a schematic design level and do a comparison and provide more detail? I would think 250,000 is a reasonable number to be able to do a detailed comparison between the two, which includes some of that investigative due diligence.
So let's say we spent 400 grand, right? We're asking for 3.4 million in seed money.
We asking for 250, you're giving them 400.
I've been on this board long enough to know that 250 becomes 4 really quick. So let's just say hypothetically 400 grand, right? We get whatever we want out of that. We make a decision on how to move forward. We're going to other town bodies and everything. That additional 3 million, is that still enough to cover the rest of that process?
Yes, because so you get to a point, you make a decision in which direction you go to. And then, yes, that balance would get you to a final design.
Okay, so that brings me to my construction and site work number. And you have the same number on both scenarios. And you also have, correct me if I'm wrong, 600 grand for demoing, that's of the existing pool.
Yes.
You're comfortable with that number, even if we run into any hazmat situations there?
That's why we have that 5% contingency to address those unknowns at this point in the stage, so.
It just seemed really low to me, based on what it costs to own a house these days. So, the $2 million though, is there a
The site number,
site work?
number? We did that based on just area. So, when we're looking at this, the area of disturbance for either scenario was similar.
So even though in the new build, we're talking about, you mentioned the plateaus and the parking and the new loop and everything, which obviously could be significant. But in a renovate, you're still looking at 2 million in site work.
Yeah, I mean, we have ADA improvements. We're gonna have new site drainage that we're gonna have to address and right size that. You know, your site circulation is unique. Drive aisle up and close to the building, all of that's gonna need to be addressed, so, this is why a schematic design phase is needed. The next level, to be able to answer those questions more accurately. You know, we were looking at this as a very high level. We evaluated based on square footage or area, and that's how we came up with that number.
And my last question for now, and this is obviously for you and possibly the committee. You know, early on, we were talking about different scenarios and a lot was discussed at the table. If we were to rebuild Dwight, new site and everything, would the existing site, once demolished, be able to accommodate the fields and the area of fields that we would be taking over? Or would the town be losing field space?
So to replicate that field, the challenge is the topography. You know, that building was built into the earth. That's why it stepped the way that it stepped. So you would need to now create a flat plateau area and accessibility.
Those costs, correct me if I'm wrong, are not in here. So that would be an additional cost.
To recreate a brand new field, yes, I did not contemplate.
You have that on the map, though, just.
I do, because we would expect that you would, there's gotta be some offset associated with it. But we haven't
There's no
discussed
idea,
what
but that
type
would-
of field is this now, you know, a turf type field, is this lighting, you know, we haven't really discussed that with you yet, but we would, it's usually something that's asked if we're taking it away, are we replacing it?
So that being said, the square foot and size, if we were to, you know, try to move forward with this and we didn't, hypothetically, one of the questions that we've received, which we're getting to later, is what if it's turned down? What are the alternatives? If we were to look at building a new school there, but building it to the projections and making sure that we don't have deficiencies based on our long-range plan. So appropriate spaces that go along with the number of classrooms. So it's a 2-section school, right? So if we were to build 2 classrooms for every grade, plus a couple extras for swing space or any changes, and not incorporate the ECC or specialized programming, based on these numbers here, would it be safe to say that we could take your square footage number per square footage cost and base it on the calculation of what that square footage would be to get that number? And how would that affect the other numbers that, I mean, basically, could we take line 1, change the 65,500 square feet to what a smaller building? And everything else kind of fall into line to see, is that a hard task?
It's safe to say, but the other ones are directly related to it, so you would not see the same proportional reduction in site and other contingency line item. I would still keep that there, but yes, for discussion, a high level discussion in this report, you know, dollars per square foot are, you know, it's tangible. So the smaller your building is, you know, it's gonna be less expensive, so.
If we got to the point where we were told or to explore other options and we wanted to still build a new school, if that made the most sense, building a smaller scale, it would not be difficult to come up with those numbers.
Yeah, the next step is gonna answer these questions a lot better for you because we're.
Which next step?
The next step of going into a schematic design is going to be able to answer these with much more clarity because we're not drawing it with such a broad brush. Right now, this is a very broad brush of, you know, and we're working backwards from the space standards, remember? So, and those are just state guidelines on square footages. They're not developed by architects. So, you know, what building is best fit for you? Your educational model, that's what you're really trying to design towards, not backing into a spreadsheet that says it's this amount of square foot. We should be designing the school that fits the community that's expected.
But to your point, what you said earlier, you said generally there's guidelines on how many square feet per different thing. So is that not what we do now?
You do.
We tell you, if we give you a list of what we need, number of classrooms, additional spaces and everything, you're basically working off of that, right? So if we use that same philosophy based on the state guidelines of square footage to make sure we had big enough classrooms, big enough spaces and everything, wouldn't that be accomplishing the same thing? I mean, it sounds like you're saying that the project would be degraded if we shrunk it and not meeting the needs. But if we didn't put the ECC in specialized programs, the kids aren't there. So the need isn't there.
I totally agree. The separation of the ECC from all my point is that to design the building in the most efficient way.
Absolutely.
To design it, right?
Understood.
And the numbers aren't what the driving factor is. It's designing it in the most efficient way that meets your needs, right?
Can I ask a follow-up?
Follow-up.
Oh, yeah, just, in the current footprint, to Mr. Ace's point, just because I want to clarify that all the deficiencies can be met, can the gym be expanded under the current footprint? Because I feel like I succinctly heard that it could not.
You're limited based on where you are with your property
So
line.
the gym cannot be expanded in the current footprint.
The question is to what degree and how big do we expand it?
Because like it said, that really, the answer during this facilities meeting was that it could not, you could not take
Yeah,
down
you're
the walls.
very limited.
So the gym will stay the same, it'll be the smallest in the district. So I just want to be clear about that.
I have another.
Mr. Lee had his hand up, sorry. Mr. Lee?
I hear what Mr. First Selectman Gerber and Mr. Aces said. From my past experience, though, if you look at the Mill Hill situation, that building committee came with one plan presented to the town. They were told by the board to go back, come up with 3 different plans.
We did, and which we did.
Which we did within that budget of the seed money, if I'm not mistaken. We didn't ask for more money in this and that. As we move forward, I want to just remind everyone, what we have here is just the beginning, right? If we want to come up and you say, look, here's $1 million seed money, let's just say, I'm going up as seed. Here's $1 million seed money, but you gotta come up with 4 plans. Here are the plans. This, B, C, D. That's what we can do, and we've done that in the past. And if I remember right, you keep it within that, and each one will have its budget, which then gets turned back to the committees and towns for discussion.
Yeah, actually, that's a perfect comparison. We did that. We had 3 scenarios, 78, 504. Can't believe I still remember. I lived there for many.
You and all of us.
We all remember.
And, you know, they all had different shapes. They all had different complications to those. They definitely had different cost profiles to them. And they were presented in a variety of stakeholders and they were debated and, you know, the final solution was there. That's the same process that I'm trying to express would go here as to compare new versus renovated new.
Mr. Krasnoff?
Could I follow up
Oh,
on Mr. Lee's
sorry.
question? No, that's okay. I just want to clarify, because I have not been on the building committees that Mr. Lee has. What you're describing about the options from the seed money, would that also carry over to what Mr. Gerber's describing, which is 2 completely different possible sites? Would that be, can that be part of the option request?
It surely could be. If there was another site different than this one that you were comparing to, then yeah, absolutely.
Other than the one that's not feasible, right? Because we know that they already told us you wouldn't be able to have an option renovate with ECC on the existing building because we are already been told that that's not feasible, right? So that.
I haven't gotten to my questions on that yet. I just wanted to find out exactly what we can find out, because that's always been one of my concerns all along about the seed money was exactly, I keep phrasing that as phase 1 of the project. But in fact, you're saying it could be phase 1 of multiple projects. We can get all the information we want with that seed money.
You just have to define what those other scenarios you want to do a comparison with, so.
Well, our seed money, and I apologize, this is going longer than I meant to, but that seed money as a percentage of a single project, if we're now saying we want to get information for multiple possible projects so that we have all the information we need, would this seed money do that?
depends on the amount of seed money. It goes back.
You'd have to increase.
Okay, I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Sorry, Mrs. Vitale, did you have your hand up?
In terms of the conversation about 200,000 for schematics, say we're not even going, what, 250 for schematics?
A million.
A million.
One at a time, please, no, we're not gonna do that.
Yeah. Say, you said, tomorrow, we're going to give you $250,000 to give us schematic drawings for Just White. How long would it take to get those drawings back?
Now, this is for new, or are we doing a comparison of,
The comparison,
doing the comparison?
yes.
Okay, or between 4 and 6 months.
Oh, well, to follow up on that, just depending on the number of scenarios, how would that timeline expand?
It depends on the other scenarios. I'm sort of saying between.
Some of the work is the same, but
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the complexity of the other sites, right? It's hard to say. Certain things could run concurrent to each other, right? If you had multiple sites, you could have, it's just the logistics of all of that. But I would say reasonably, you're no less than 4 months to do a comparison of this order of magnitude.
That covers the civil, the structural, the septic, the HVAC, the abatement, the hazmat. $250,000 covers all those professionals.
We would obviously need to put that all down. We would have to do a detailed analysis to determine to what degree are we taking all of that. But yes, you would start the initial piece of going through each of those, right? And start seeing how much you're gonna get from that. So, it's hard to pull out a design number without looking at all of those. But the goal would be to start those conversations, right? So you can do that, and an estimate, right? So then the question is, are we doing a cost per square foot number? Are we bringing in a professional estimator to do much more of an itemized number? So to lock into just the number, the point is you're trying to do a fairly, detailed schematic comparison. Can you do that for 250? It seems reasonable to do as a first attempt of getting closer to making a decision, yes.
Mr. Krasnoff?
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of follow up to everything everybody's saying, because this afternoon, we kind of went through a lot of this and a lot of people weren't here. We were looking at basically just Dwight new and Dwight reno, not the ECC piece that a lot of us felt was a bonus that we could do. And correct me if I'm wrong, you felt that the reno, just looking at it, was gonna be a much bigger task. Does it make sense to spend the money and look at that? Like, is it money we're wasting? I don't wanna see us spend money on something that's gonna, is gonna be exponentially. I think it's silly money that you're throwing out the window.
The renovate is new is definitely a risky proposition just because of all the unknowns that you're gonna deal with, right?
Like what?
So, well, you're gonna need to find swing space for your students. Let's start with that. So just from an educational perspective, there's gonna be costs associated with offsetting and moving them somewhere else for, as we said, for almost a 2-year period, right?
That's not yours, but that's.
But it's part of the first thing you think of is we're saying to be able to do this effectively, you need to find swing space and move students off site. That does have a cost implication to the project because those off-site improvements aren't necessarily reimbursable. So you're paying dollar for dollar for that, at the state share of that. That's the first piece. Then it's getting into just the nature of a renovate as new of a building of this era. Okay, and the compactness of the way the building was built, the compromises of trying to fit that all into that existing building is going to be a challenge. You're going to spend money to take things out, to put things back in. Kind of equated to if you needed to take a 1960s Chevy and convert that to an energy efficient hybrid car, it could be done, but it's gonna cost more money than buying a new hybrid car, right? So with that, that all could be done, but there's so many unknowns that you're gonna tackle during renovation that, you're gonna have to address. And that, that just means you need a much larger contingency, and those are gonna cost you at the end. And those costs at the end are gonna be change order costs that are much higher than, if we were a bit. So that's where I think, and sort of the conversation was, asked, what do we see here? We say renovate is new.
Mr. Vitale?
Just to follow up on, in Sherman, this last phase for the air conditioning, going into it, we thought that we'd be able to use the existing vents, and correct me if I'm right, and ended up that there wasn't enough room. So the project had to totally be reworked, not necessarily ideal in terms of what initial thought was for that building. We went through the budget, hit the FEMA cap, and some things that we thought were going to be able to get done in that phase just didn't get done. I'm concerned just about the hazardous materials that we potentially will find in that building, just because of the age of the building and just some challenges we've had over the last 10 years. And those unknowns, we may not know until they start.
Mr. Pearson?
I kind of wanted to delve a little deeper into the reno versus new in terms of the construction costs. We're using $700 a square foot as a base for the reno, and $750 for the new construction. And honestly, what you're saying is like those numbers are volatile no matter what. They can obviously go up on both the new and the reno, but breaking down the reno costs versus the new costs, like.
Yeah, why are they
What
so
things
close?
are,
Why are they so
I
close?
know they're, why, yeah, and I kind of understand that they're likely to be close, if we're probably gonna be farther away if there's more that we can reuse. And we don't know how much we can reuse. I guess I'm wondering how much volatility is baked into that $700 number. Because it is close to the 750, but I'm assuming that a lot of what you're trying to bake in your thinking is some of these unknowns that we're talking about.
Yeah, so with the renovated new, we're predicting the exterior walls are gonna stay in place. We're gonna remove all the windows, we're gonna do a window replacement. We're gonna keep the walls, we're gonna keep what we call the superstructure. The main steel is gonna be there, but we're gonna need to do some reinforcing to that. Our foundation is already in place. We're not gonna be necessarily removing all of that. So when you look at that compared to a new building, that's being built new, right? But we're also now need to strip everything around that, and now we need to re-insulate it. So the volatility is in taking the things out to figure out how can we put back new, a better insulated building that we currently have. That's the volatility of pulling it out. As you mentioned, the asbestos piece of it, there could be certain areas that we just leave concealed, or we have to figure out ways to encapsulate over it, just can't remove it without, demolishing a good portion of the building, which wouldn't be practical, right? Because we have to keep the good part of the structure in place.
Right, but I guess what we're trying to get at is some of those assumptions are already baked into that $700 number.
Some of those assumptions are already baked into that. That's correct. Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Not to sidestep yourself, but I just wanna bring back something about these different plans and stuff with seed money. I think it's important, especially what Mr. Ace is saying and First Click and Gerber is saying, knowing the time frame on how long it takes to get some of these designs going, I think it'd be smart of us to say, you know what, here are 5 ideas, right? Instead of 2 or 3, and then after they get presented, end up like a Mill Hill situation where you have to go back. I would like, if we're all serious about doing something about the White School, no matter what direction, we need to tell them, here are 5 designs. Here's your charge for these designs. Here's your seed money. Let's move forward on it this way. and then come back, you're gonna present 5 different designs to the boards, and I think that opens up, and I think that's key to hearing from.
I'm so happy you say that. First of all, I would like to thank you for how many 10 building committees? So you probably know more about building committees than most people here, but except for Silver Pet Facility. But one thing that I have to emphasize is what I think is really pretty neat is I can't speak for anyone else, but I can sort of speak for what I feel from talking to people. I'm not going to speak for the Board of Finance. I'm not going to speak for the Board of Selectmen, but I have talked to a lot of people. I believe there is no appetite to not have a school, like minimal appetite to not have a school on that property. That's a good start because that wasn't always the discussion. And I believe there is an appetite to have a really nice school on that property. So that should be a relief for people. For me, the issue, but I can't guarantee that, but I'm saying that's what I feel from talking to people. The issue for me is how big the gap is between the different scenarios, because if there's a $20 million gap, or if you do this boring, study and it turns out to be a $30 million gap or a $40 million gap, these numbers are so big that difference can be used to do something bigger, better, somewhere. I mean, we do have other properties, right? So if you're going to move ahead with an ECC that's going to cost, let's say, an additional, if it ends up being 20 or 30 or whatever, I don't know what the risk is. There's risks here that haven't properly been quantified and deserve to be quantified before you forge ahead. It is all my opinion, and I won't hold any other, other people have different opinions, it's fine. But like, for example, we have another property in the southern part of town. We've got another property in Southport. We could build a really, really nice facility for that with that amount of money or less. And we better make sure if we're going to, we're spending a lot of money, we better make sure we're doing the right thing. And it's not based on a lack of understanding of what we're doing. So, and no offense to Ms. Flynn, who's a friend, if the difference comes down to the size of the gym and ends up being, the most important thing, that's not a $30 million decision. I mean, that in the end, we need to know what it is that we're talking about here before we jump in. So I think we should have I don't know if we need 5 or 4 or 3, but definitely 2 or 3 different paths, because that may be, and what David said, that may be actually spending money that ultimately in the end, you're tossing it out, but it's a risk reward thing. Like, I would really rather throw away a couple $100,000 figuring it out, nailing down the risk as best we can, before you make that decision to jump in along one path or another. That's fine. But if you jump down the wrong path because you didn't do that work, that to me is really a mistake and not good for the town and all the other taxpayers.
Sure. Mrs. Flynn. I just want to make sure we stay on agenda. Okay, so please.
I absolutely want to say, I just want to say that I pointed out the gym just because we were talking about, I just want to finish because it got cited, just because we were talking about the feasibility as on the agenda. And I was going to talk about those other properties that you referenced when we were talking about the answers to the Board of Finance questions.
Right.
So I think for us in our process, this is the first time we as a board are discussing, these questions, Silver Petronelli. So I want to get our full questions out to them. The facilities committee just did that today. We're doing that now. So just for our information too, I think it's important for the public to hear it. I think it's important for us to hear it. So those questions are, well, they're small.
It is.
It was-
And I don't know, your conversations today were that I wasn't at, so I couldn't make it, but the gym is a sensitivity for a lot of people. But these sensitivities are, there's a dollar, you live with certain things if the dollars are large enough.
Absolutely. I would say I'm much more concerned about the relocation of students for 2 years than the size of the gym.
Right,
But I haven't gotten a chance to get there yet, and I absolutely.
President.
Just a quick follow-up. We've been looking a lot at these numbers, and I definitely appreciate what you're saying. And if it jumped to 30 million, I would definitely agree with you.
Right.
At this point, it looked like we were somewhere around 8 to 6 after reimbursement. I'm just putting it in perspective. We're in here.
Reimbursed.
They're not in these two reports. It's 20 million. It's 19 million.
It's 15 and change, and then we get the reimbursement, extra reimbursement.
Can someone put these numbers on an Excel spread? I put in Excel spread. I'm sorry,
No,
There's two reports here.
It's in our,
One of them is 19 million.
the other are, the waterfall.
These are net of, like, there's estimated reimbursements in here, and one of them,
We can do a chart for you. We'll do a chart.
one of them 65.7, the other's 47.8.
It's 65 and the school, I believe, was 53 of them.
Yeah, because David,
did
he's
this work
talking,
earlier.
right, just to clarify, Mr. Gerber's talking about a new Dwight and the ECC attached to it versus just renovating.
Right.
That's what,
Renovating plus 9,000,
Right.
Addition.
Yeah, I'm separating the ECC piece out.
Quite.
but that's not
Is
what we're
including-
talking
We're
about.
gonna have to do
Including
white up top would have
one at a
the,
time, please,
anyway.
one at a
I'm,
time.
I'm trying to make it apples to apples for you in terms of.
It's not apples to apples, because if you're gonna, there are like, spend 5 million on an ECC at Mona Terrace and make it really damn nice.
No, I'm saying the Dwight piece, I'm trying to make apples to apples for
I
you.
know, but I don't
And the
think that,
ECC piece separate.
yeah,
ECC net is $8.3 million right now.
you're not doing that, though. That's not the plan here. I don't understand that.
That is,
Do without an ECC on the.
No, we looked at it without the ECC, apples to apples. Because we're comparing the costs, so if the costs are almost the same, that's
Oh,
what
if you're
triggers the
building-
higher
You're
reimbursement.
gonna build something without an ECC and it's the same.
That's what we're looking at now.
Oh, that work wasn't done. You're just breaking it out. based
Correct.
on-
Well, it's kind of there, but we were breaking it out in our meeting. And that's how we were looking at whether we do new or we do reno, just that piece
Okay.
alone.
Got
And
it.
if we go to do the new, that's what triggers the opportunity to look at the ECC.
Right,
Because we can at the reno, and then what we looked at was the cost for that
okay.
was around 8.3 million. So that's what I was kind of getting,
sorry, Mr.
put in
Peters.
perspective.
I did these numbers today. If it's helpful, I can list them out from the different reports. Just very, very quickly. So on the 6th September report, which is new construction plus ECC, the gross cost for that 52K square, or actually 65.5 square feet for the school plus the ECC, the grand total is $65.7 million. Minus $13.7 million at a 31.07% reimbursement rate is a net cost of $52 million for new plus ECC in the 6th September report. The renovation only dated 16 October, which is for a 50,000 square foot project, but does add that 9,000 for the deficiencies. The grand total for that project in that report was 47.8 million, minus 12.5 million of reimbursement at a 26.07% rate, leaves that project with a net of $35.3 million. The difference between those two projects, and I get that it's an apples to oranges difference, is $16.7 million.
And then do you have it with the 26% for the new?
I did just those two, because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I've also done it with the 26, so that's what we're expecting to possibly be able to get because it's gonna end up being as much as or more than the.
Yeah, the point is that the renovate is new, although it's showing as there's a big gap between the two. My point has been that there's a still riskier proposition of moving into that.
Renovate eventually could just be more than the build new at the end
Or
of the.
could begin to get very close to, right?
Can I just follow up one more?
Sorry, Mr. Flynn.
Can I just follow up one more? I just want to point out too, because I think it's a little bit important. I believe, and I would want this double checked, but the extra 15% bump that came out of the new legislation this year seems to be a rather cause that the state legislature has pushed. They want those at elementary schools. So some of the locations that we just brought up that aren't Board of Ed locations right now, I'm assuming Barberry, the adjacent to Giant Steps and Mona Terrace, those wouldn't get that extra 15% bump.
Okay. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mazzacanelli?
Yeah, just as a follow-up to Ms. Flynn, so they wouldn't get that 15% bump, but
If they weren't attached to the elementary school.
right, but what we are seeing all the time up at the state, correct me if I'm wrong, is legislature does as it pleases. And I mean, we're finding out Trumbull projects that are getting huge amounts of money, which there's nothing in the paperwork that would have predicted that. So it's, if we're going on the assumptions of what we know, I guess what I come back to is, Mr. Peterson mentions a chart. And Mrs. Flynn just used the phrase, this is our first time discussing. I am not looking to go back and rediscuss what we've done for 3 months. But in fact, there are 5 possible options, and I assume you have only been asked for 2. And to build like new, and I'm gonna say on top of the hill, meaning new, with or without ECC. On the existing plane, we renovate with a second floor. Renovate with ECC, you have eliminated, as that's not feasible, and I think the board accepted that. But there are options you've never talked about that we as a board have never been presented. We have never seen all of these numbers in a spreadsheet itemized. I mean, I'm not, and I will have to reference Mr. Lee, although he's not here, and I'll repeat it when he comes back. He mentioned all these things keep adding up. Where have we ever discussed those numbers? And I actually am very grateful that Mr. Asa brought up, we don't exist in a silo here. As someone who, is serving on the Parks and Rec Commission as well, we are desperate for field space in this town. And we're talking about wiping out field space. And this is my first time hearing, we're not even positive what we'll be able to fit into that space because it's, fair to say, quirky. And so we might be depriving the town of more fields. We don't know if we'll be able to replace it with anything. And that's a little bit of being, the voracious Board of Ed, which is a reputation. I'd like to think we're a little bit better neighbors than that. So there are just so many costs, and we don't have that full picture yet. So first and foremost, when, Mr. Gerber references that 250,000, and that will give us much better numbers. Again, this is not my area of expertise, so I'm sure that others here are more comfortable with that. But to make sure that we know what we're getting into seems very advisable. And this is now getting to the next part of the conversation, which, doesn't involve you in terms of putting together these numbers. But we keep talking about this costs money, that costs money, and I see no numbers in front of me where we are quantifying exactly what are the full costs of this plan. You talk about, with portables, or do we try to do it in an existing space if we did a renovate as new in an empty building? If we're talking about brand new, then what actually would be the cost, for the demolition of the building and making that usable space, because we've just deprived the town of a resource. There's a lot going on here, none of which do we have numbers. We're still arguing at the table here about what are the actual numbers we're doing. Mr. Peterson mentions one that has with a $16 million difference. But if it's a different reimbursement rate, it could be this, but we have no reason to know if we can get that. It's just,
Isn't that?
I, by the way, I want to acknowledge, it's really complicated. So I'm not saying that exactly as a judgment. It's just, there's a lot of work still to be done.
I'm just gonna follow up. So in the previous projects, I understand that when the project came before you, but for the seed money, some of that, as has been told here today, we need to, that's some of that money in order to find out some of the answers.
And that's where I had always understood seed money, and that's why, again, I don't claim to be an expert. It doesn't matter how many of them I've approved before. This one's different. My understanding was that would, for example, could have only been for one of these. It might have been for different options within it, but it was for one site. Mill Hill was not looking at 2 different sites when it got additional options. And so I just think it's an important piece of information, because ultimately, if this involves us having to tell an entire different school community, you're going to have to endure those 90-degree days for about 5 more years, because these costs go up exponentially and our waterfall has to get adjusted accordingly. I'd like we talk about responding to the school community. Well, then I think the school community deserves to know exactly what the costs are of this and how we're going to have to adjust accordingly.
Mr. Gerber.
I would just say, one of the frustrations I've had in my current job is we often sit around for big projects, sit around the table and everyone throws out, what about this? What about this? What about this? And for like an hour and no one ever actually ties it together. I mean, puts it all on a piece of paper, it starts ticking off. Well, what about that? Okay. And then you talk about it and then you get a conclusion, you tick it off. Like these questions are big. So if there is no place to relocate students, if you simply can't do it, that's a big open thing. And there's, that's a big problem. But I don't know if anyone's ever tried to tackle that question. I haven't heard an analysis of like, if we're gonna have to relocate the kids, like where are they gonna go, for how long? What are the implications of that? What are the costs? That has to be answered. Just like the borings have, the risks on the field have to be answered. But I agree with Jen Kennelly that, and this was something I've gotten a little bit of a shouting match with someone on the phone. It's like, I've never seen these numbers. Like this is a big project. Like we shouldn't, in my opinion, just be moving forward in a direction until we've like knocked off some of these big questions first. So like, it's worth spending some money to narrow down the risks in order to know that we're making the right decision. Because we're talking about 65 million, which could escalate from there depending, so it would be, in my opinion, it would be irresponsible to move in that direction until we've thoroughly, or as thoroughly as possible. Like, I don't want to make it like sound like it's a hill that can never be climbed, because we need to get this done within a relatively short period of time. And I can say that from the people I've talked to on the board of finance, they would say, and I would say, that if it turns out that we do this analysis and the school on the hill for 65 million turns out to be the best answer, then that's what we're going to do, so that's fine. I'm willing to do it. I'm just not personally willing to sign off or to vote for something where those questions haven't been answered. So I think we need to make sure we're doing the right thing and we've considered these big risks and possible costs before we sign off on something of that size.
Ally?
In terms of, the Board of Ed has approved the request for seed money. It is now in First Selectman's hands in terms of next steps. The various options. Right now, that decision in terms of a charge, that lies with him to start, just in terms of process. So bring it to the board.
Okay. This will be my
That,
first time.
well, I mean, in terms of commissioning a building committee,
Yeah.
and what the number that ends up being the full amount approved. If you want to do something sooner rather than later, if you approve the full request, there can be parameters on what that charge to the building committee can be. So that is a decision to be made by the Board of Selectmen. And then whatever we decide in terms of charge, it'll go to the Board of Finance for them to discuss whether or not they're comfortable with the finance side.
Okay.
I think that's where we are right now, based on the actions taken by the Board of Ed, and where we are in terms of approvals. And go ahead.
Just gonna say, but whatever we do has to meet the ed spec, so it has to be a collaborative process.
Oh, yeah, and I think it absolutely does. The Board of Education will be giving us ed specs for an elementary school, whether or not that's an elementary school that has been renovated like new. I'm even just taking the ESCC part out of it because, I think there's universal agreement about the condition of that building needing to be addressed. So whether it is renovate like new or new, those ed specs, they're going to be similar in terms of what the final product should look like in terms of the administrative space, the gym, the classrooms, the art room, band, compared to the existing building, which has a whole host of efficiencies and is not being used efficiently. That's it. And then the ECC, that's where, if I'm hearing you correctly, that the concern on adding those ECC classrooms, you're not necessarily there yet for this particular site Because there might be other options and you want to get a better understanding of what the other options might be.
Right, if we do this work, this initial work, and we find that it's 15, 20, 30, whatever it ends up being as we nail it down, let's say crazy, that's 30 million. It's not worth spending 30 million for 5 classrooms if you can build those 5 classrooms for 10 million or 5 million. You know, like that's what I'm saying. So,
Mr. Basil.
Yes, so to Mrs. Vitale's point, I've been involved with a couple of these now over the last 7 years. It's my understanding, like Mr. Gerber said, that generally, if you can refresh my memory, when does that Board of Ed give the ed specs to the building committee? Do we give the Board of Selectmen the ed specs for when you do it? Like, I can't remember, to be honest with you, but my question is that, this is where we need Jessica Gerber to pull it out of her magic hat. The question is, if we do need to give you ed specs, I just want to say that I think we're going to need to give ed specs for a few different possible scenarios. So you're not just going in blind and saying, we want this, this, and this. I think it would be imperative to include in the ed specs in one of the scenarios, adding the ECC, because that may change the size of the APR and all of the other stuff associated with it. So because we've never done this, I'm a little confused as to the process. And I just want to, and we don't have to answer that now, but I just want to know what you absolutely need from the Board of Ed regarding ed specs on various scenarios. Because I don't want to just give you ed specs that say, you know, this is what we need. Now, what we can give is this many classrooms and this many associated spaces and everything that we know. But we're talking about different scenarios, and one that I pitched for building a school for the kids that are just there now with a little swing space, plus all of the associated spaces that we've determined are needed for today's day and age. Then we're talking about renovating plus an addition, and then which might mean that the spaces are different. And then we're talking about the other scenario of new with or without ECC classrooms. So I don't think the ed specs are going to be apples to apples on that in this scenario. This is very new.
Well, we have an architect here. Removing the ECC, would that change the design of the elementary component of the building? Are you gonna make the cafeteria any smaller? Are you gonna, in my opinion, from my previous projects that I've worked.
They're really separate. They're really
Right.
separate.
But how,
There's a little bit of overlap to that, but there is, you know, there's separate entryways. They have their own separate sort of administration that goes along with that. Any of those other support pieces. The sharing is most likely just the mechanical and the infrastructure that goes along with it.
and I appreciate that, but I guess my question is, if we're talking about a 14 classroom school versus what is proposed in the 65 million, that's very different. And that's more students in the building, a lot more students in the building.
Right.
So does that mean that gym and APR, and I don't know, those are questions
I would
Core
say,
Facilities don't have to be increased for that, is basically.
yeah, I don't think significantly. The only time in terms of the ed specs, you don't technically, you have to approve your final ed spec at the time that you're going for your application.
So to Ms. Vitale's point, that makes it simple.
And can I?
Yeah, it's not, Mr. Gerber.
I mean, I was like, initially, could you make it vague and just say that the APR needs to be the appropriate size for the number of people and the cafeteria? Because the ECC, if it's in a separate location, sure, it may change a little bit your requirements for the APR and the cafeteria. But can you word it in such a way, at least for the direction to the, maybe not for the application, but the direction to the building committee, that it would be an appropriate size for the number of.
Yeah, essentially what you're asking for is to develop a program. That's the term that we would use at this point. Now, it's essentially an ed spec, but I'd use the term program. that program is gonna be listed there as part of the charge to the building committee with some latitude, right? Because that may change, but, and that would be presented. If it changes, it's brought back and.
Art room,
amended.
music room, band room, right?
Yes.
Being cognizant of state standards because we want to make sure that we are maximizing.
Yeah, with the intent of maximizing your
And
reimbursement.
in the renovate, that's gonna be harder to back into because we can't really move some of those walls.
Because you just have the constraints of
In order,
the.
in other words, fitting the deficiencies that we know are identified at the, it's gonna be harder to back into because we can't move walls in the renovate as new, right?
That's correct.
Okay, Mrs. Flynn.
Just a quick follow-up, and I don't remember what meeting or if it was a facilities committee, but can someone just clarify? Because I distinctly remember hearing that part of the, the appeal of Dwight going back years has that been because that core student population is lower than a vast majority of the district, that adding those ECC students or those special programming students wouldn't put the additional need on the core spaces. So at a school like right now, look at Stratfield right now, that's running, if you were to remove the ECC population, they're running at a lower occupancy level. They can accommodate the ECC to use the gym, the art room, all those things that I know that my children used when they were at the ECC there. So I think that those are all things that are good conversations to have that I don't think that I know I heard played a part of these decisions. I just don't know where they are in the documents per se. And they should be there.
Just two things. I think I hear what you're saying about the ECC. My one recommendation in this situation is we want those plans. Let's look at if an ECC is doable, possible there, right, with the cost, while we're investigating like the other things down on the line on these questions, because we haven't dove deep into those other situations that what potentially could be a good plan may not happen because of A, B, and C. So that would be my one thing. My second thing is, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, I don't, being on these building committees, I thought the ed specs was within the building committee, because I remember the best way to describe it is the building committee, no? Like you tell us we need the classrooms, you need this, you need that.
Given the ed spec. The building committee is given the ed specs by the Board of Education.
Specifically voted on.
Just change.
Okay.
State law requires us to vote. Yeah, we
Kind
have.
of like,
They started to write the own, we had to rubber band them.
Have to be voted on. Minutes have to be submitted with the application to the state that it was voted on.
okay, all right.
It can be changed.
Specs.
That's what.
It can be changed, okay.
Hill, we had to revise them.
So we went back and changed it and, okay, all right, that was my confusion.
So I just wanted to highlight one of the reasons we did look at the new build in the ECC. It was because we wouldn't have to build a second gym, a second cafeteria. So we can utilize a lot of the spaces that the school that we were already currently building for the ECC versus if we build a standalone, we would have to consider how we're gonna get all these other things. That's how we were trying to keep the costs down. And in looking in the new build, it really was to try to be efficient with our costs versus some of the other options that have been thrown out there just seemed a little more complicated to us, not knowing what we were gonna be given from the town. So just an understanding where we were coming from as a facilities committee.
Yeah, and ultimately, you may be right, but we just need to get there. Yeah, yeah.
Just one last question. Only because I keep bringing this up and I don't know the answer and you're an architect, so you can finally help me put this question to bed.
Do my best.
A second floor, is it possible or not at this site? Because I haven't actually heard you say that.
On the putting the second floor over the existing building?
Correct.
Probably not possible.
Because,
Probably not reasonable, I should say. Anything's possible. Not reasonable. Because of the way that roof was never designed for a floor. Those walls were never designed to handle the loads of a second floor, which means we would have to create a new, you'd say, skeleton inside or outside of the existing walls to be able to now support that independent of the existing. So you hear this often where people say it was designed to put a second floor on.
I don't hear that all that often, but I'll.
I do, right? But they planned they were gonna put a second floor on it later.
Yeah.
Never happens, you know, so the roof is designed for roof loads.
Which
floors
I
are
understand.
designed for floor loads. That's the way this building is designed. To retrofit that, to put a second floor on, it'd be more cost effective to just do an addition adjacent to that. Your challenge here is you just don't have the real, you don't have the land to do that efficiently, so.
Mr. Issa?
Yeah, just, I guess procedurally, this is a question, because we're talking about seed money, we're talking about scenarios now. And I've said this multiple times, it's very different than any process we've ever done. And I'm not sure who this question goes to, if it's the chair, to Mr. Testani, to Mr. Gerber. Would it be possible, instead of going the path that we've always done with a building committee and seed money, would it be possible if the board were to ask the town to approve a pot of money that the Board of Selectmen could, whether it be hiring a firm or whatever, in conjunction with our central office, to look at these scenarios we're talking about, do the boring and everything without a building committee? Could that move forward?
Well, okay, you're not talking about like the building has to be a building committee, right, for state reimbursement?
For the actual process, but I'm talking,
You're talking about the
a lot
investigation
we're talking about a lot of investigations here, and this is,
of the building?
I don't think you need a building.
John, what?
For this, I don't think you need a building.
John's agreeing with you.
yeah, because I think.
He was chair of the board.
Because maybe there's a way that we can still accomplish what we're asking to do without the complications of a building committee. We're talking about more feasibility studies. So if the town were to say, we're gonna put X dollars into a pot and we're gonna use that money to, in collaboration with the Fairfield Public Schools, look at these scenarios and whatnot, and Silver Petroselli and move forward. And then we get the answers we need. They come back to the Board of Ed, they come back to the Board of Selectmen, they give us their findings. We have concrete ideas and numbers. And then the board can say, okay, given this, this is what we think makes the most sense. This is what we're going to put forward for bonding.
That, to me, that's
I think we
definitely the way to go.
define very clearly what it is you wanted, like what you actually wanted to look at.
Have like a steering committee.
There's, a lot of like, we could do this and we could do that, and I don't really know what that means or who would be involved in all of that, but I know for all of these things, you're talking about a lot of subcontractors, right? To come in and be able to do a lot of them. So I'm not sure I really am buying the $250,000, but I'll trust you. But I think we should probably, because, I don't know how far deep we're gonna go down. So that can be an offline conversation that we have, but whether it needs a building committee or not, but I hear you, Mr. Issa, that's not.
Yeah, and
That would be more.
I think we need to be really clear.
Could I just say that I agree with you in that I think the board could give direction and kind of what we've talked about tonight. We already have these two, right?
Well, I think
So we're
actually the other people should give some direction because.
They're the ones that might say no.
Right, yeah.
Well, and I was gonna echo that, because if this is gonna be like the redistricting process, where every other week somebody says, go look at that and go look at this. We have jobs to do besides that. So we should define what those parameters are so that we don't drive them nuts either. Because
Sorry, Mr.
that's
Gerber.
gonna go
I think it's
15 months
doable.
then.
The nice thing is I think we're all kind of on the same page as well, like we want a nice school there. So that's a good start. So I think that, like, we have project managers, we've got Angela's, we've got Silver Petroselli, and we've got yourselves, and we could make it work guided by like the Board of Selectmen, assuming that we can meet with the Board of Ed and make sure that we're not straying, but it'll be a lot more efficient than starting at first principles with the new building committee. I mean, Jason is on this board, so he's not gonna be on the building committee. Tom Quinn has passed away, so he's not gonna be on the building. Like, the people that are seasoned are not, there's, I don't know. I just think it would.
Vitaly's volunteering.
Well, I think that, I'm all for getting more information and not spending millions of dollars just to find out that we can't do a project, but I also want to be really cognizant of having the people that are involved in this initial work. Ideally, I would think that you'd want them to be on a building committee if this is going forward. Like, you don't want to start all over with the building committee in terms of expertise, and I would be interested in your opinion, Mr. Lee.
Mr. Lee.
Well, it is, I mean, I think that's why, in terms of the work that's already been done, because this work would then you'd be getting a head start on the project. Correct me if I'm wrong. To some extent.
There's definitely continuity from this, I'd call it an enabling phase, that you're doing a comparison. So having that continuity is going to guide some of those decisions. So when you do transfer over whatever shape that project is in, that you're definitely bridging right into it. So I agree. We have done it before where there was a phase one committee and then there was the final building committee. And sometimes there's a little bit of.
All right, so I think we're getting a little bit off, so maybe this can, structure, this can move on.
So my concern really is just, I don't want to stall this project. I want to keep it moving forward. I don't want it because we're going this way, all of a sudden we have to wait an entire year to get the bonding for the building committee. So just as we're continuing this discussion, just for my perspective, totally think it's wise to go this route. And if we could do some of the work before July 1st, that would be great, but don't want to stop it.
The ed specs are being worked on, so those should, at least in what we've laid out, should be ready soon. Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to, just one final cap to the suggestion here, is if you did go that route, I would be eager to have incorporated into that discussions on some of the other sites and scenarios that you talked about, because like Mona Terrace, like Giant Steps, like I think not to derail or slow Dwight at all, but that will determine whether are we putting an ECC there or not. We're still moving forward with Dwight.
No, it has to be.
But I think it has to be part of that, and it gets everybody on the same page, and it's finally out in public that these properties are available. This is what it would be, and I think it would be prudent to make sure you put more than the 200 or 400 grand in there to make sure that you cover it.
I think the 400 was the stuff that Silver Petrocelli is currently looking at, but it's going to be more to look at the other side.
I would just, before we go too far down, looking at other sites, just a reminder to Board of Education, agent of the state, these projects, we're looking to get state money, our state delegation advocating, getting that funding. I would just ask that everybody includes them in the conversation because they will be vital in moving some of this forward later in the process. And it gets to be also back towards educational outlook for the ECC standalone versus attached to an elementary school. If we're going to go down that road, and I've shared this not with the first selectman, I think with the chair of the Board of Ed and Mr. Chestani, if we're talking about basically adding another school building, so if we're looking at Mona Terrace or an ECC at Giant Steps, that might be I don't know, I'm not saying that, I'm not convinced that's going to be any less than the plan that is before us today. That is going to come with operational costs, that you may not have by having the ECC attached to an elementary school that's going to be carried forward on the operating budget for the years to come.
So just going back to process for a minute, just want to make sure that we're all clear. What we've approved is seed money, right? So anything that you're doing at Barberry or Child's Garden, that's not a part of what we set forward. So just want to put that out there.
Well, I think.
We didn't approve
We
that.
do. No, you haven't approved that.
So
but
you can spend your
what
money
we
to.
do with
Yeah.
that will end up,
If you guys want to explore, it's up to you.
it will have to end up in the report.
I'm just saying it's not part of that pot of money.
Right.
else?
Can I just,
Well, my only question is, given the next agenda item, will since the Board of Finance will have some questions that need to be addressed in this whole process that we've just discussed, I think a lot of this then will get resolved in that process. Probably
yeah,
skip it over and go watch the Yankees.
Go watch the Yankees.
Yeah, no, let's not, no, we'll go through them. I think.
I just think it's really important that at least if we're gonna be involved in the process, which I like the direction we're going, we need everyone's thoughts on paper. So Christine just said the operational costs, if we look at, like, we need everyone to write down and send in the,
We send in those asks, Mr. Papa George, about operating costs at Mona Terrace?
We did.
operating costs, the cost to relocate the kids, this whole list of things, that if we leave something out that's important, that would really not be.
I think she's talking about operating costs, like additional kitchen staff workers that would have already been in an
We're gonna
elementary.
need a nurse,
We
we're
need
gonna need a
every-
custodian, we're gonna need an
A
administrator.
budget.
We need every major factor.
In addition to.
We don't want to leave out a major factor that could influence this decision. That's what I'm saying. You just brought one up.
Bringing up like,
We might not have included if you didn't. bring it
Well,
up.
I mean, yeah, and I think that we may be, and I don't wanna, I'm
Okay.
gonna respect the chair that we're going off topic.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
okay. Thank you very much for being here and explaining all of this to us. Much appreciated for your time earlier today. Very
Okay, thank you.
grateful
Thank you very
for
much.
the answers you've been able to provide thus far.
Yeah, nice to
Thank
see
you
everyone.
Very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Agenda. All right, review and discussion of Board of Finance questions and responses. Mr. Testani.
Well, again, I think the main purpose of adding this was to come to a consensus that whatever was submitted to finance, everyone on the board is comfortable with responses, with their accuracy. There wasn't any disagreement on, well, I think this, or why didn't you say that, or talked about this? So I wanted this to be a whole discussion. So again, I submitted what I just put down on paper. I didn't want to get into too much. They were concise bullet points for the most part, and just giving a general response to the questions, because some of the questions I think need what we just talked about, a lot more exploration from experts. But again, these were the gist of everything that I put down on paper as a starting point. If anyone had questions or more input, that we can talk about it. And
Okay, so are you okay with the process if we just go question by question? Is that okay?
sure.
Okay.
I'll take
I'm sorry, Mrs. Gerke?
I just wanted to point out for whoever's listening and also for the board members at the table, the unusual nature of bringing something like this to the board table for this kind of meeting. Typically, when we ask for feedback when the superintendent looks for feedback, we do it through either a Google form, or you would ask for our feedback in another manner outside of a working group to work on the document. It's very unusual. I've already given you my feedback in a red line version. I don't question of this special meeting about, I mean, part of the meeting was, but it wasn't, it is for the call. And, these questions have been available to us for 1 month, and the superintendent asked it for this meeting on Friday. So it's just the delay in answering these questions, whether we know the answers, we don't. This isn't it's not an opinion piece. It's not something where I believe that we're looking for put on perception as simply the facts of what's happened. I mean, we had facilities meetings to answer these questions. So just kind of, we talk about process. This has never been part of the process. So that's my input here.
Well,
Sorry.
just to respond to that, the Board of Finance asked specific questions of the Board of Education. So I think the Board of Education should construct the responses. I mean, for example, what happens if the Board of Finance or town bodies turn down the idea? I presume the Board of Ed has thoroughly vetted what the plan B, C, and et cetera ideas would be. Okay, if you want my response, no, we haven't. The answer is no. But somebody here may say, well, we did vet, the possibility of going to Burr. But did we vet, do we have another
All
plan?
right. So,
Can I respond to that?
sorry, Mr. Asa?
I have a completely opposite feeling of Mrs. Guernsey. I welcome this meeting because I think it's a good opportunity, because I think the Board of Finance specifically said that they had questions of the board, and multiple members of this board at the table have said we should have more working group meetings and do full board discussions. So I think that's what we're doing. So I respect your opinion, but it's also the opinion of many other board members that this is the right approach. And I think that this is a good opportunity here. To Mr. Testani's point, I think some of these now will be diverted and say it will be part of the process that it sounds like the selectman's going to be voting on. But yeah, I just, this is something that is never been done because we've never been faced with a project like this.
I made a
Can
comment.
can I clarify that? What do you mean a project like this?
Well, in the recent history, Mill Hill was one that came back afterwards to be asked about different sizes. We're talking about an ECC add-on. We're talking about renovate, build as new. In the past, projects have generally been on the waterfall and they've been renovate and add. Pretty straightforward, cookie cutter with some add-ons. This is not what this is.
Oh, just sorry. So because it's a possible new building,
Yeah.
is it being different?
Yeah, new versus, I mean, there's a lot of differences here than what we've done in the past. So I think it's not unusual to see a different process. We can't always just rely on how we've done things in the past, because that's not how we move forward.
Can I just?
Sure, it's just.
Through the chair to Mr. Stani, I fully appreciate that. I actually think this is a very different process from someone who's followed through the audience and followed along very heavily from actually my advocacy pretty much started the day after Mill Hill got sent back your way. And when I look back, building committees did send back several options. So when we're talking about precedent being changed, I fully appreciate that. This is a new project. We're seeing that in the workings of this meeting tonight, which I would say is a unique meeting that I've never kind of seen this complex at this table. So I think all of us need to be open that it's going to be a new process. So I would request through the chair to Mr. Testani that if we are going to have a discussion meeting like this, I think it would be a good idea to have some kind of document similar maybe to the budget document. I don't know where, because I get very nervous, to your point, that this kind of document, trying to create it in a silo administration is very difficult. So I think that this is going to be some kind of a hybrid of a new process. So while I fully appreciate wanting to get the input of everyone, I really respect Ms. Guernsey's point of view that we need to know what we're coming into as board members, what to expect we need, what you need from us, what other board members need from us. Because at this point right now, we're kind of just staring at a document that I'm jotting, I was feverishly trying to figure out where to give my best response. And personally, I like that structure of a document that we can all refer back to, that we can look at, that who has put their name on it. I just think that that's a more indicative piece of our work. So that would be my ask, to maybe meet in the middle somewhere and move forward.
Fine, I'll be happy to put this on a Google Doc and you guys can all edit the same document.
So
Because
let's stay
sending in red line versions
Yeah.
from everybody and trying to piece that together
Yeah.
is just,
And I appreciate that, but I really
That's what opening up input from 9 people means, though.
Yeah, and I think it's a real, we've heard a lot about, getting the input of board members, and I think that is a tremendous use of time right now. Like I said, everyone can use it as their will. We all have the choice as board members. I know I take advantage of it when we have it for curriculum documents, when we have it for budget documents, so I see no reason why that can't be used in the same process.
Sorry, Mr. Krasnov, but then I do want to stay on agenda.
It's on agenda. Chair to Mr. Testani, I have some concerns about how this was prepared. We spent hours and hours in the committee. Time, I guess I kind of want back going over these. For example, question 1, we went through Burr, we went through Sherman, We went through Holland Hill, we went through Riverfield, we went through Mill Hill. I don't see any of them here. And, you know, I'm shocked that this wasn't prepared in the manner that we discussed in our committee meeting. I thought we were gonna come with the information that we discussed and that we've vetted, and that's the point of the facilities committee, to open up a discussion. To me, a lot of these are super open-ended and just open up a massive discussion with zero focus. And
With all due respect, I'm gonna have to say, until today, I don't think we really truly vetted anything until we had an expert at the table. I said that earlier. We've never vetted through any engineer or architect Riverfield. We never vetted Osborne Hill. We never vetted, and people can disagree, but until someone with a high level of expertise says something's not possible, he just said it, things are possible, they may not be reasonable. So the only ones that can say that is somebody that has the expertise in that field. None of us here, at least I'm not aware of, do.
I do again take offense to that because I've showed you GIS maps and geographical surveys showing flood zones and whatnot, like that bird, and how it's done, because I do it for a living. To me, it was going above and beyond to spend the money. And again, other board members suggested to do it, and I understand why you did it. But for you to say we didn't have any experts or anyone that didn't know anything, I do take a little bit.
Mr. Lee, I want to get to the questions here.
Going back to some of these questions, I think seeing tonight with our expert here and then further input from our first selectman, I mean, even if you look at number one, the question back then, after tonight, is totally different, right? Because did you explore putting ECC additional 5 classroom other locations? Well, on the agenda tonight is potentially 2 other locations, and potentially we can still add ECC if the seed money is there, whatever, to come up with those kind of designs. That changes question 1 right off the bat. It's gonna answer with that seed money based on whatever design we decide and what the charges on those design. Question 1's gonna be answered in 6 months.
What's wrong with the answer? I don't actually mind this answer in the sense of like maybe some more detail, but I mean, the problem with this.
I mean, with those, you come back in 6 months with designs about where to put
There have been
ECC.
discussions regarding the possibility of distributing the 5 ECC classrooms across multiple locations. Like, we have done that, right? I mean,
We have.
Yeah, but to me, it doesn't answer the question. It's like, where did we look at?
yeah, I understand what you're saying, the detail.
The detail, which is what they keep asking us for. We can say we looked at things, but they're gonna say, well, what did you look at?
I understand.
Did you look at Riverfield? Did you look at Burnham? We gotta sell and show other boards we did our due diligence. And unless you put specifics, you're not doing that. You're just in a roundabout way saying we did it. And other board members have said this before. We can't just say we did it and assume everyone's gonna believe us. We gotta,
Riverfield can't be done because you take over the green space, it's on the flood zone, and there is no place to fit the, right.
and this is what we discussed in our meeting last week.
Osborne Hill can't be done because you have to regrade the entire back lot, things
So
like that.
bullet points would have helped a lot of this. It just would have. And I would prefer the answers being like that, that's just my opinion, with a little more detail, so that we don't have questions from the Board of Finance coming back to us saying.
Mrs. Vitale, did you have your hand up? I see you, Nick.
Yeah. I think it would be helpful for that work just to be put on paper. And I'm not sure regrading is a reason that it can't be done, considering the amount of site work that we are doing
Whatever the reasons are.
for Dwight. And just, I want to thank you for all the work that you have done as a board and as a committee. But in terms of those 5 classrooms on the ECC, I think, just so you know where I'm coming from, as a member of the Board of Selectmen, I would want to look at other elementary schools. And is it less expensive or feasible to be attached to an existing elementary school? Riverfield and Osborne Hill, because they are location-wise, I think, You know, we said that Riverfield, if you look at a map, that's the central school. And in terms of reimbursement, you would still imagine get that 15% bump because it would still be that model that the state seems to be supporting. I would support, and I'm not saying that it's feasible or that I support it even more than what's before us today with Dwight. I think that getting more concrete answers on that would be appreciated.
Can I do a follow-up? Just for some expectation setting, because I think it's good for the committee and us. Do you expect us to explore every elementary school? Because I think if that's the I just want to get it out there because that's the path where if because you're saying just Riverfield and Osborne, you're one select person. So are we investigating every element? Like, because when you start to do mathematical equations, and I was around for redistricting, I think at the end point we got to like 39, 40 different varieties, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So I just want to avoid going down that path. So at what point do you think it's feasible for one of our committees or our board to say, yeah, this may work, but we heard Silver Passion, educationally, it's not optimal. We would never choose to do it. We would, you know what I mean? I think that there's statutory requirements, federal requirements for this board that maybe other bodies aren't aware of or don't care about, but we have to. So I just want to know.
That question here, like I specifically said, NSS doesn't accomplish the goal of, so.
That's what I'm trying to.
That is in the
I feel
response.
like this question is a new and separate project. So we're gonna investigate with the thing that we've already approved, the Dwight piece. But this other piece, is it like something new and different? Because we have not, right? This is something new. We have money on the waterfall for ECC, right? That we could put into Mono Terrace or whatnot, but this is like a new endeavor then. And I would agree with Mrs. Flynn is that some I would not support because it doesn't meet addressing the extensive transportation issues that we have with our ECC kids. So I would only be interested in West Side.
And that is why I also, because while other people watching this may not appreciate the work that the Board of Education has done in looking for EC space. I mean, 2018 charge about finding a location. And the transportation piece of it, the staffing piece of it. I suggest those two schools based in part from past discussions that we had while I was a member of this board in terms of location.
That's why I asked for the clarification. I think it's important to hear that, especially from you as an ex facto at the table. And I think it's important information because what we don't want, or what I wouldn't as a board member want to see, is just chasing down rabbit holes and delaying a project that we know needs to move. And whether the ECC is a part of it, or now we're looking at it holistically separately, we're on a few different paths here, but I think or at least I can speak for myself, that the condition of that building and that project to me has never changed, and I don't think it has for you either, but the information you need is evolving, so.
If we're looking at that, I'm committed to needing to address that elementary school space, and also myself, fine with ECC classrooms at Dwight. In concept, in terms of location of having it in the west side of town, it's contrary to Mr. Asa thinking we're up in the country. We're really, not that far. And our elementary school population there is coming from Southport. So we do, and people from the north end drive their kids to Southport for pre-K. So I think that people will come, especially if there's a shortage of preschool space. And we did have a preschool at that school at one time that was populated.
Excellent, Kelly.
A few things. We keep talking about the transportation costs. Through the chair, Mr. Testani, and I apologize for I didn't think of this question. How many Dwight students are enrolled in the ECC?
As of the last report, 4.
So we have 4 students. We're talking about one of the current option with the current seed money for the current project that the majority of this board moved forward. We're talking about 5 ECC classrooms, and right now we know of 4 students who would be enrolled.
That are in the Dwight feeder pattern. I think there was 11, and that would be going to Burr. Riverfield, I think, had close to a dozen. Osborne Hill had close to a dozen.
So in terms of transportation costs, we're not saving much. I just wanted to say, we keep talking about this, we're gonna have this big transportation savings, and I don't think that's the case. But more to the point, we have been asked repeatedly by the Board of Finance to have a plan, an entire plan. And I know that look, it was obviously a lot of work to get that seed money out of here. And again, tremendous work by the Facilities Committee getting the long range facilities plan completed. I'm taking nothing away from that work. But we cannot, in good conscience, now step back and say, but we just want Dwight and we're not going to deal with these other things dealing with the ECC. It's part and parcel of the same. First of all, the seed money we put forward was for ECC. And now we're talking, oh, but maybe it doesn't have to be included or not, but we've got to move Dwight forward. We have a lot of questions without answers, and all of these pieces are interconnected. So I just don't want us treating these Board of Finance questions like this isn't stuff that they need answers to in order to approve this seed money, which is for one piece of this very complex puzzle. These questions need to be answered, or we risk them saying, we don't have to get put on their agenda. We know we don't have to get put on their agenda. We don't even have to get put on the Board of Selectmen's agenda if we don't give them what they need. And I come back to Mr. Krasnoff's point of we need to have put all this work in. I'm hearing about discussions happening. I did try to go back and read all the minutes, Mr. Krasnoff. Thank you, and you were correct. The detail got more and more, which was incredibly helpful. But there were no attachments. There was no data. There were no charts. There was no number crunching. And I hear about discussion. And to Mr. Testani's point, that's not vetting. And some of it I get that we're comfortable with because of years of experience. I don't expect the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance to take our discussions as vetting of tens of millions of dollars. And so I just want to push back a little bit on the idea that we're just here to move Dwight forward and we'll get to this. It's all part of the same thing, and we do have to do all this work.
To Peterson.
I just want to say that I think we can streamline things. We do have the chair of the Board of Finance in the audience, and she may be able to give context about what she thinks, what level of detail she thinks that her board may want. She's empowered to speak for her board if she's willing. She's listened to this entire discussion for the last couple of hours. So, but I mean, that may frame better what our response specifically to the question that's on the agenda should be.
Want to come up?
Or did you want to keep your distance?
All right, Mr. Issa.
Yeah, to Mr. Peterson's point, and I was going to ask through the chair to see if Mrs. Charlton would come up to speak to, in light of the conversation that we just finished on agenda item 3A. In light of that, do you feel that this list of questions is still completely relevant, and if we need answers to all of them, or if the indication is that the Board of Selectmen is going to go in the direction that they've spoken about, do we pause on these questions, because it sounds to me like most of them will probably get discussed at the next phase.
Yes, so some of the questions will go away because they'll presumably be answered. You know, if a charge is given to the consultants that you need to look at 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 scenarios, that would directly address a number of the questions here. Not all of them, but certainly some of them. So maybe the thing to do would be to go back and parse through it. Say, okay, these 5 questions will be addressed by that comparative analysis. There are other things, I think, to Mr. Krasnoff's point, and I don't know, maybe Ms. Jacobson made the point. If there's been work done to rule out adding ECC space to, 8 out of the 11 buildings or whatever it is because of known issues, I think something like that is fine to put in summary. You've done the work. And then there's some here that I think should be considered when you are looking at the charge of what you asked those consultants to do. So one that I'll point out is there was a question around the Jennings component, for example. The waterfall, the plan that you put forth has the ECC ultimately in 3 locations. And it didn't seem like everyone at the table had a warm glow around the Jennings plan and adding the 2nd floor. So the obvious question becomes, if, are you really committed to that? And if you're not, does that change what you might do with the ECC in phase 1? 4 classrooms at Dwight, or would you put more classrooms somewhere else? So I think it's a mixed bag. Some of them I think will go away because they'll be referenced to this comparative analysis that's being put together. Some I think are interrelated, as Nellie said. And then some of them I think just in terms of locations that might have been considered and ruled out for reasons that are, maybe well-known around this table, but not to the other town bodies. That's the answer on some of them.
So just to follow up on that, Mr. Krasnoff says that he is, I don't know the word you use, but you are certified enough to make a determination using GIS maps through your.
That's not what I said. I said there's certain properties that you can look at and make a pretty good assessment that it's gonna be difficult to do certain things.
So
I'd say I was
based on that comment,
They're
that
in town.
do you feel your board would be comfortable with that answer versus a professional opinion? And that's not a disrespect. I'm curious, because if that's the case, and we're gonna go to the Board of Finance and say that Mr. Krasnoff, who is an experienced real estate professional,
Well, it's not just me. We can ask town the same.
Please,
Just.
please don't
So,
go across the table.
I guess the question is, to what level do you believe your board is going to want to know with regard to vetted? What is vetted?
Well, for those types of scenarios, I would maybe put that back to you. What would you be comfortable with? I mean, if there's a thorough explanation of all the factors you've considered, again, it's hard for me to say because I don't know these properties the way you do. I don't know these buildings the way you do, but
I'll speak. I don't think most of us do.
Okay.
So for an example, we would say, well, we're not gonna go out and send an engineer and architect out to North Stratfield because we don't want to put another ECC next to Ward. So we're just not even gonna look there, right? Because that's not something we're interested in because we're trying to spread them out yet. So that would be fine. We're not interested in that.
I mean,
As an
What if that
example.
replaced Jennings?
Like right next door to,
North Stratfield is farther from Ward than Jennings is.
it's like, I mean, I personally wouldn't, but I mean, so in other words, if we're gonna
That's not
spend
vetting.
money, if we're gonna spend money for architects and engineers to go to 11 elementary schools and say, you can put 5 classrooms on here or not. Is that what I'm hearing? Like a new project?
So just stepping back, I think part of the point of these questions, I can't speak for the whole Board of Finance. I'm personally, as Mr. Gerber said, that, the space is needed, that the building, something needs to happen with the building, that the space is needed, that the ECC space is needed. I think the objective here was just to make sure that we've thoroughly thought it through and we're meeting the needs of the district in the most fiscally responsible way possible. So I'm not sure putting 5 classrooms here versus here versus here, there may, realistically, there may not be a big cost differential
Right.
between buildings. So I think there's gonna have to be a little bit of, I don't want to say common sense, but a lot of these questions, the gist of them was that if you're adding the ECC at Dwight, it creates the need to build new and sort of ruled out the renovation. So what does that look like in terms of all the numbers and all the implications? Because clearly there are other alternatives for the ECC. They may not be your favorite, they may not be ideal, but it all comes down to, adding the economics into the equation. And so, I'm not sure that's a great answer. I can give you a great answer, but I think that, with that in mind, how are we you know, how do we build the numbers in here and determine that we're doing this in a fiscally responsible way? I think that's probably the best way to think about it.
Mrs. Vitale, did you have your hand up? No. Okay, Mr. Krasnoff.
I've followed that, thank you. And that's kind of the process we did next. So in terms of me just being, I'm not. But we looked and Mr. Testani had some input too that was great. For Osborne Hill, he felt it might need to be a standalone building. So for now, we pushed that and said, listen, we don't want to go down that road. We don't want to spend money on a standalone building at this point. Riverfield, we looked at it. There's some wetlands in the back. Topography, we know what the traffic pattern currently is there, all the complaints we get about parking there, about how busy Mill Plain gets. So we said, listen, this doesn't sound like a path we want to go down. We eliminated that. Sherman, we all know why Sherman didn't work. Holland Hill, we had already done recently. We figured we'd rather do it on something that's a project that's new. And Mill Hill, we just went through Mill Hill. So if everyone.
So I mean, I think the bottom line is here is put in the detail and whatever.
And that's what I hope to see. And I didn't mean any offense by it, but that's what I hope to take in here when we talk to them.
In.
We'll load the Google Doc and we can.
But you have the answers to this, so you can just provide more detail into that answer number one, right? You have that, what Mr. Papa George has, right? All the things that we discussed for each of those sites. We didn't look at North Stratfield because it's like, wait, right, over there, yeah. So is the board saying you want an engineer and architect to go, like, I don't personally need that, but is that something?
No, but I wouldn't feel comfortable answering the question saying Riverfield's out of the question because of what has been stated tonight.
You would,
I don't.
the fields would be lost there.
To Mrs. Charlton's point, it might not be what we want, but I mean, if we lose one of the two fields, I'm not saying that's ideal.
Yeah, we could just put the detail in.
But I'm just saying,
Riverfield also.
it doesn't make it not feasible, it makes it not desirable.
Well, the core too at Riverfield becomes a problem.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe not. If we're talking about, you know, adding space to a building and saying that we might not need to increase. I mean, I don't know. No one at this table, I'm sorry, and this is no disrespect to anybody, no one at this table is certified to answer these questions.
But you are saying that
Factually.
you want an.
So I'm not
architect.
saying every elementary school, because to the point of there being common sense with some of them, we might have consensus that some of them don't make sense. But I'm not comfortable saying Riverfield is out. Osborne Hill is out. What I'd be comfortable saying is Riverfield, if it were to be possible, this would be the effect, and it's not a desired outcome. Osborne Hill, this would be the effect. It's not a desired outcome of this board, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. We can share our opinion of whether it's desired or not, but I don't feel comfortable ruling something out factually on paper with no one here being certified to say that.
Okay, so we are talking about an architect and engineer.
Honestly, what I think should really happen is I think we should have a partnership with the town and we should do a study of all of our facilities and all of our buildings and feasibility on how to move forward with this.
For the ECC.
Yeah.
Right, that's what I was kind of getting at. My answer was, this sounds like a new project, actually. So, and that's what it's
But I don't-
shaping up to, right?
I don't
it's-
think we
Because
have.
we did this, a lot of work in 2019 on the ECC, and then it fell, and then it just was like, we're just gonna leave it at Stratfield, right?
But at that point, we wouldn't have options. There was nobody saying that we could potentially have these spaces to
We
possibly
might need to
build.
actually need some money around this,
Yeah.
actually, so.
I'm saying hire a.
So separate from your borings money is,
On way.
if you wanna do a facility condition assessment for ECC, we're gonna need money for that. Or you guys can do the town properties or what, I mean, you have facility assessment reports on Oldfield and Barberry already.
So my opinion is that this is such an important issue that we should spend some money to make sure that we all know what the options are. Absolutely. So if it's on the town, it's all taxpayer money. I prefer it be under the town, but with the collaboration with the Board of Ed.
I think the exercise is would just be valuable to have from a town perspective, looking 50 years out in terms of if there is a bump in population growth. You know, we're talking so much about Dwight, looking at Dwight and some of the development that is going to the POCD on the southern part of town. Those elementary schools are already at capacity. So at some point, this town might be looking at moving those kids, doing it up up north,
Around the horn.
around the horn and up to Dwight. So as we're making these Dwight decisions, I'm very hesitant about making the school any smaller or not thinking that there's going to be more kids there at some point, being very short-sighted. Or if an addition to existing buildings, is it possible in the future? Not even for the ECC, if at some point you have to add
The one site
more
you're,
elementary school classrooms, it would be.
one site you're not gonna move elementary kids
To
into.
answer your question,
Right.
spend the money and have, and do this right.
Too much at stake.
Yeah, and I don't in any way want to slow down. I mean, Dwight needs to get done. But this can be in parallel and we can still move forward with all the work that has to be done, pre-work to get
Yeah,
Dwight
this needs to
done
be a separate project.
and, separate but parallel.
Mrs. Maxine-Kelly.
Through the chair, Mrs. Charlton. And this is where, okay, I follow Board of Finance basically through whatever Mr. Peterson reports on. When does the bonding of seed money, when does that actually happen?
July 1st.
So we have months to do this work and have answers. There's no, am I wrong?
Yeah, you have time. The, typically to get on the bonding schedule, we want to have everything authorized by the end of April, I would say, through the RTM. So
That 4 to 6 months, which at first phased me a little bit, suddenly now that does not look quite as daunting.
you have time. You know, can I just,
We have time. I don't know if the subcontractors.
I mean, it just.
Well, he said it was a 4 to 6 month
Silver Petroselli.
process. So if we already know that in terms of getting information we need, okay, I'm gonna totally guess. But it sounds like this kind of feasibility study, I can't imagine it's quite as hard. There's just more ground to cover. Those are the two things to me that that could be going in parallel because we have that time.
For this question too, let's not call it the 5 classrooms because it's not 5 classrooms. So in the answer, perhaps we can provide some more greater detail in here around what exactly the wing is, including speech, the psychologist, the OT, the PT, the social worker office, the admin space. So it's not 5 classrooms, but so we could clarify that too.
I don't know if we're gonna go through each question, but there is one that just sticks out at me and I just want to say it out loud. It's the question that says, how are HVAC projects viewed against? There's no numbers on anything, so I don't know.
If there is.
Oh, numbers, it's on a different, it's number 12, section 0.3. How are HVAC projects viewed against other priorities? I would just note, I think all of us said that. Jennings and Dwight are both HVAC projects as well. They don't have means of fresh air in those buildings, and I think it's really, it is, I don't think it's intentional, but it happens quite repeatedly in public depending on which board. So I think it's important to just clarify that the students and staff in those buildings don't have means of fresh air. So as we're talking about these projects, regardless of how we move forward, I just think it's important to note. I think when we start parsing them, it just, for me, I read it like that and I wanted to have
Can I
it.
just give context? Is it okay if I give context behind the question? Because I don't want it to be misunderstood. So I think where that stemmed from is, we're going back to the capital planning workshop. So, and maybe, I know this board knows this, but just, so for the benefit of the public, that there's 2 objectives of that workshop, right? One, the first is to look at the plan in its entirety, town board of ed, total dollars, and say, is that affordable within the parameters of our policies and everything else? We didn't get there. We failed that test. Okay. I think there was consensus around the table that projects are going to have to move and be shifted because we didn't get there. So, and let me get back to that in a minute. The second objective of the workshop is to look at things at a high level and determine if there's questions about projects, particularly new projects, projects that have been escalated, projects where costs have changed. and put those questions out there just to enable officials to be better prepared when they come back and ask for a vote. But going back to the first one, the reason for that question, and it's listed, there's someone somewhere else, and the reason for asking about the priorities is we have to address the project as a whole. And so I think what should be important to this board and what you should talk about is how you're going to do that, because you voted on a capital plan. And I know we changed the process. We had a fixed budget last year. This year we don't have a fixed budget. The town and the Board of Ed each, did a full assessment of needs and put that forth, but then the two plans got added together and the plan's too big. So the next step has to happen. And I would just say for that, and the reason for that reason, and where that question ties in, is that you all should have a plan and make sure you understand how that's occurring. How are you sitting down with the town? Who's in charge of that process? Is your board going to do it? Is the superintendent going to do it with Mr. Gerber's team? So we weren't just asking theoretically how are HVAC projects viewed against other priorities. It's knowing that on both the town side and the Board of Ed side, or maybe one or the other or both, projects are going to have to shift on that capital plan. So that was the context.
So I attended the meeting, so I know the context is for me, but I think for members of the public, I just think it's important because not everybody, there's a lot of members of the public that their kids go to schools that have clean moving air and they don't even know. I mean, you would be shocked how many people I talk to in town that have no idea that we have schools that aren't still air conditioned because their kids just haven't hit one of them yet. And then they hit middle school or high school and all of a sudden it's an issue. So I do think for the public, these documents are public. And most people don't watch the capital planning meeting. I think we're one of the few people who do because we attend them. So I think words are important. And I think in a document, anytime I'm going to get the chance in public, I'm going to say it.
No, I appreciate that. I just wanted to make that clear because I don't, I watch these meetings too, or parts of them. And I didn't really hear, among everything else, I really didn't hear where you all were going with that, or if there was a plan in place. We have a committee on the Board of Finance that's looking at some of those issues, particularly with the WPCA. We've been working with Mr. Gerber, but you guys need to get on that because, what we've said is that until we have a plan that works in totality, we're not going to be approving large projects within a plan. So I would just say to add to your own work, timelines to make sure you understand doing that and how it's getting done.
To that point, Mr. Charlton, one of the things I did like about having a fixed budget was we knew. Whether it was the right number or not, that's been discussed in multiple different forums. I think it would be helpful though, as we move forward, and I know discussions have happened, but for us to do that work, to know we can't go over a certain number. And if there's any way to get more definitive direction on that, I know it would be appreciated.
So I just want to clarify, can I clarify, Mr. Asa, too? Like, we had a number, but it wasn't a hard number because you always knew that some years you were going to be lower, some years you would go higher, and that overall it was averaging out because otherwise you're never going to be able to ever do a building, right? So I hear what you're saying, the target number, but usually it was framed more along, but over the 10 years, it averages out to that kind of a frame. So you could be lower or higher because one year the town might be higher and the Board of Ed is lower, another year DOE's higher, town's lower. So it's not a hard cap, so to speak. But yes, we don't have a new, we don't have a new range, so to speak, yet.
No, because we're not looking at it that way, because I think we're fortunate now that like everyone is a true, that at least the majorities on all the boards are true education advocates, but they also are true advocates for the town. So most people understand you got to flush your toilets too. So like we have to now work together. Like I know this very well because my wife was on the board for 12 years and I was on the RTM. That there was times where you just couldn't trust people on certain boards, and they would do things that did make sense, like cut 3 classrooms on a school for no reason and they couldn't build it. Okay, so those days are over. Or at least they're not. I don't know if they're always going to be, but that doesn't exist right now. What exists now is an understanding of the lack of investment in infrastructure in this town over the years and a sort of a crisis situation all around on many fronts. So your crisis may bump my crisis on the other side. So we need to know what all the issues are. We need to know, we're not going to tell you that you only have $12.5 million or even $20 million. I need to know what your issues are. But we then need to get together, figure out whose crisis is bigger.
Yeah, so everything on our waterfall is pretty much a health, safety, or security issue,
Right.
other than the new turf field that we put on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pardon?
And this.
Yeah, and the long range facilities. On the waterfall, it's not a lot of like,
No, I know, but it requires us like meeting. and
so are you gonna
talking.
reconstitute like the capital planning work group for, as an example?
I mean,
for
a lot of this,
for that?
does all this have to happen? Like, I'm talking about opening up Excel spreadsheets and like running through like we need people to be working together. Like, you're not gonna
We
do
need a
all.
forum. We need a forum.
We need a
to-
forum.
We need a public forum for all of this, like yeah.
However you want to do
We need a
it,
forum.
but we need the conversations to start happening.
Right, and a lot of it is at like really like at the detail level where you're plugging numbers in and you're watching them flow through. And whether or not they're gonna go over a certain threshold that's gonna maybe influence.
But how do we know when it's going, like how, without that?
Yeah, because we have models, so we need people on the Board of Ed side to come, and we need like a joint working.
Exactly, so a working group, that's.
Yeah, but it doesn't, like, it doesn't, yeah, we need to do that. We don't have that right now, I don't think.
So like the capital planning working group.
But
No,
that
that's a
was more
public
like-
meeting
that was
where
more
nothing
elected
gets done.
officials versus management.
I mean, I sat through those didn't work.
Well, I think we get a little bit nervous about that, to be honest.
Shouldn't.
So
I work with people in my
I'm
administration.
not talking about that. I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like, you're talking about a management situation, but you know, when that was happening before, we wanted them to be held in public because we wanted to be able to have a public conversation.
Can't get real work done in public. I'm talking about really detailed work, like looking at models and, but I'm not talking about high level discussions where people go around in circles.
You're not talking about decisions and voting.
Decisions and voting has to happen in public, but we need to have a working group of people who are like doing the work.
I would ask that Mr. Gerber's office can contact the
Yeah.
chair and Mr. Testani. And that through the chair, we delegate a couple people to participate. in it.
And Angelos has to be there. And David Becker has to be there, and our project managers have to be there, and some of our finance people and the Board of Ed finance people, we need to just open the kimono with each other and act like we're one town, that's all.
I think you need Board of Ed representative, somebody from the Board of Ed needs to understand, be there also, because the school administration, the town administration could get to a number, and then ultimately it comes back to the board for a vote, and they could potentially change that. So I think it would be helpful just for buy-in.
Well, I don't plan on being at all those.
Well, I mean,
I mean,
You don't,
I'm
but
talking
you-
about working meetings. So unless a Board of Ed member knows how to run a debt service model, then there's really no point in them. But, like at some of these meetings, I'm just saying we need to work like we're one town. We're not separate. We have separate on some things, but like, we don't have to have it formal. Like, we need to be able to work with you like you're part of the town. That's
We
all.
want to be partners, but we just need to know what we have to work with.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that's.
No decisions should be made without it being formal through the Board of Ed.
Yeah,
I get it.
that's what I'm,
But a working group, like a real, like, I'm not gonna say grunt, should I say grunt? A grunt working group of finance people and facilities people, you don't need representatives from a board there. Until you get to a point where you're gonna recommend something. It's been a stumbling block for some reason. It really makes no sense.
Would say somebody from the finance committee on the board could possibly be helpful.
Sure.
Do you mind if I just want to address one other point that you made? So you asked about the parameters. So that is in process. So that is why so the Board of Finance established a committee. We've had one meeting. We're gonna vote on a couple of other things at our meeting next week. But the point of that committee is to work with the is to vote on what the administration recommends in terms of those parameters. Because right now, what that capital plan does is it tips us to our maximum capacity against our borrowing policy, assuming everything goes perfectly. So there's no contingency at all, no room for anything to go wrong. And we know that's not been our experience. So we concluded that we need some kind of contingency at the plan level. We have to figure out what that is and what that translates into in terms of dollars. And then when you literally start plugging those dollars into the spreadsheet, it's going to have an impact, and it's going to tell you, how much you have to move out of a given year. Because every year in that bonding schedule, bonds get paid off, new bonds put on. So it's a very, it's working with a spreadsheet. But the first step was to determine how much cushion we should have at that plan level to cover all these things. Because if we have a plan that gets us up to 10% debt service on our budget, nothing can go wrong. And then you would really have to not do a project at all.
I have to say, I really appreciate all of you being here, because I think a lot is getting accomplished. And I think this is an example and a template of what we can do more of, not to make you have to come to all of our meetings. In no way am I saying that, but I appreciate your time tonight, because I think this has been very helpful.
We're never going to get through these questions if we don't keep moving on. So any last questions for Ms. Charlton? Thank you very much for helping.
If it makes it easy, post it tomorrow morning in Google Doc.
Yeah, I'd like to just go through a couple of things,
Okay.
just high level. So on number 2, I think we should correct the number here and actually include the chart with the options that we know, so that we actually have the shown out and not, because it's not 70 million. And just break it all down by the different scenarios that we have. That was one comment that I have. Does anyone have anything specific they want to jump out on? I have a couple more, but yeah.
If we're on question 2, I have no problem putting in the high level numbers.
Start.
But I think we can also say that based on the discussions tonight, it's going to be explored further. And I don't think.
You want me to just say it,
The current chart.
see attachment and put a link to the,
I don't know. I don't want to make people go look for stuff. Like I just do an Excel little chart with the numbers. I put it in my backup. I think Mr. Peterson said he just did the same thing. I would just do the 26% as well. But I also want to get to this question, because this is Mr. Asa, sorry, did you have another one, hon?
No, like I said, I think just high level on this, and that, this is the discussion tonight is really going to be explored further on side as well.
All right, and again, that goes for number 4 as well.
Yep.
Then can you just clarify for all these questions, 5 ECC rooms, because it's not what it is.
So I think when you say that though, Mrs. Jacobson, I agree with you. But I think the simple thing is it's 5 ECC classrooms and associated space.
Yeah.
And I think that's all it needs to be.
Exactly.
Associated space, just add those 3 words.
Offhand. Sorry, Mrs. Lynn?
Number 7, bullet point 3, include all analysis of renovation scenario that was evaluated by the BOE, including options considered to temporarily relocate kids during a renovation. I just want to say out loud 2 points. Number 1, I want to make sure that we're not unintentionally putting in anything that would make it look like we could operationalize an emergency plan. I think we've all seen, Greenwich, Stanford, places where schools have closed. And I can just say for myself as a board member, there are some of those scenarios that I would never intentionally put my hand up for. So I think that was one question that I kind of looked at a little bit.
Follow up on that we have that, no, we don't have an emergency 2-year
We don't.
evacuation plan. Right? So, what that would look like, I have no idea. We need to rely on the superintendent. to
Yeah, I
tell
think-
us where
Districts have.
That's what I was gonna say. I don't think that that's an
No.
expectation that you would have enough swing space for an entire elementary school. And I get a little nervous trying to conceptualize an emergency plan that someone's like, that looks like a great idea when you've never taught 3rd grade. And all of a sudden we have 1st graders at Riverfield, 3rd graders at Sherman.
I think it's safe to say
You know what
we're
I
not
mean?
gonna have, we don't have
But
that,
that's-
or does others?
Yeah, I think I would like to just see that be like, no, we don't have that plan because it's not feasible. rather than try and have Mr. Testani make efforts at it. It
The
makes.
answer is no.
Yeah,
Here,
not a problem.
Like, no.
can we go back to the five since we're just going through?
Oh, sure. Sorry, I didn't know what order we're going.
I think we can also refer this to discussion earlier.
Well, no, I wouldn't. That would not be my consensus
Why
because
wouldn't the BOE consider constructing a new Dwight Elementary at 5 ECC classrooms?
I would not consider that.
Oh, sorry, I misread that. Oh, sorry. So we have not, I think it's safe to say we have not discussed relocating the Dwight campus.
Can I add, even the one
That's not
location?
again something that I would write, but go ahead, Mrs. Lynn.
I was gonna say, we haven't even discussed that would kind of be going back to having a discussion about a one location ECC.
No, this is talking about
But both of
building
those-
Dwight somewhere else.
No, it's talking about,
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I guess it is.
I said it was
Discussed it.
Why would, yeah.
Yeah, I
why
don't even know that I would go there.
Why would we?
We didn't want to go there.
Yes, I'm rereading it again, all three parts of it.
More diplomatic.
Thank
Why-
you.
I think that's,
That's what I said, it was.
We looked at it, it's only 6 acres. It was a really tight space.
Yeah, sorry, the way this was phrased, I
one
apologize.
at a time.
A location due to Mill Hill. There were just a lot of factors that just made it not ideal. Could you possibly, I guess, if you really want to, but I don't know why we'd not do the projects we've been looking at.
Well, as a follow-up to that, I think the idea is that if you're gonna build a school brand new, why does it have to stay on the Dwight campus? So I'm just saying, that's the rationale
Yes, Why
behind,
would you move
I-
next to Mill Hill on a small? piece
that's the
of
part that I completely agree that it isn't, but the idea of addressing, if it's brand new, that means it can go anywhere.
We already own the land though.
But
We
can we say
already
there's-
have the land.
Can we say?
I'm
that-
saying I'm not the one who asked the question, but the spirit of the question is if you're gonna build brand new, you could put it anywhere. Have you considered other land options? To me, that's what the question is getting after.
So couldn't we just say we have not considered this?
Well, we looked at that. We looked at it.
That just would not be my answer.
6
How would you
acres
answer?
I
and
would say I would not consider this.
that's what we said. It's 6 acres and next to.
I would not consider this,
Oh.
period.
Why would you do that? It's literally a block from another elementary school.
That's.
Ever.
Say,
0.25 miles from Mill Hill.
Point five.
Krasnoff just said will be one of my answers.
Is there anybody, can I just ask through to the chair, is there anybody on here that would want to explore this?
To explore the Giant Steps property,
Moving Dwight to Giant Steps.
I want to explore the Giant Steps property, but
So I think you could say there's not consensus of the board to do this. Period.
I'm gonna jump back up really quickly, Nick, if you don't mind, to 6. I mean, or back to number 6, the ECC stuff. So thank you to, who put this together, but this only goes back to 2021, 2022. I mean, in my response, I went back too far, but I went to 2009, 2010 and had the projected beginning year actual, end of year actual that actually had a chart and showed over that amount of time a more than 100% increase in our actual counts for ECC. And just for people like on the Board of Finance or other town boards who don't know everything that we know, I think a little bit more than a couple of years here would be helpful to actually show how substantially ECC has been since 2000 and however you want to visualize that. I would just want many more years than this, but.
I would second that because the number of questions that we get at budget time about Z and where it's going. Every
We
year.
have consensus to use your data in this answer.
I mean, however Mr. Testani wants to do it, or just add more years, I think visually it looks nice,
Well, I think
but
the purpose of us going through the questions is to give him how to answer it, so it's from the, so.
does your data have IEP versus non-IEP broken out?
it just had the enrollment, so if you.
Yeah, so, because I think that's an important part, because obviously the IEP is what we're required to do, and then there's the other, so if.
I don't know if Mr. Mancusi will have all of that back to those years, so
Probably
we
not.
could add that at least going back as far as we could. I was trying to show growth, right?
Right, no,
We
absolutely.
tried to just go from the COVID years on, after COVID, just to show that, as you can see, the numbers each year have grown. Just at the beginning of the two years. As you
So,
can see, tremendously.
yeah, I just think a little bit longer longitudinal.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so is it safe to say that we all agree that we're gonna use your data and add in whatever within reason Mr. Mancusi can come up with in a short period?
Yeah.
So, maybe a few years,
To have the IEP
because
stuff.
he's got it here, so he's got 4 years here. So it's gonna be a tremendous amount of work to add that. Is it, what's the return on the work?
I would say,
Really gonna
could I,
difference.
can I give an,
Carlton's here. I mean, how many more years do you need besides 4?
can I?
How far do you want us to go back?
For the,
Question
ECC
6.
enrollment.
ECC enrollment.
Question 6.
looking for projections, I think.
You don't, you can't really.
Please provide enrollment
that.
projections.
So you have no.
Yeah, we had this, so SLAM gives like a guesstimate on preschool enrollment of recent years. If they didn't before. So I think what you're trying to look at is a trend line, right?
Well, yeah, I think the purpose of the question was if we're gonna make this investment in ECC facilities, you know, what does the growth potentially look like if you get to this 50? So, you know, once we do this, do we have space we need?
Can I follow up then? I would actually say that it's kind of a really important point to include IEPs because I'm taking a guess, but I've worked in that world. And I would say that trend line is increasing, especially post-COVID. How many students, because I think that
But this shows the.
no, I understand that, but I think for me, I would like to see that not tremendously far back. I don't want to know how much work for administration, but if you could see it, I think I'd be interested in seeing that split because we also are focused on that peer ratio too. So I think seeing how many IEP students we have, I don't know, I'd be interested in it.
You're talking about an enrollment trend line and an
Yes.
IEP trend
Yes.
line and how do those?
How do those intersect? That's for me. I would be
I
interested.
don't think we need that for the BOF.
Oh, maybe not, but I'm just saying, well, we're
We need
looking,
to do that now for the BOF.
oh, I was just saying if.
We have the end of school actuals from 2000 that Mrs. Jacobson did to 2000. It shows that the exponential increase year over year.
No, I know. I just think.
And we have projections from Malone and.
Can I just say, I think that the visuals at the Board of Finance, especially when I've looked at special programming and special education, have been very effective. Like when I went back and looked at those like 2000, I'm gonna misquote myself, like 19 presentations when you guys like dove into the special programming ads, those visuals, I'm just gonna say as a parent myself, I use those a lot to kind of explain to people. I think that those kind of charts can be really helpful. And we talk a lot about our role as the Board of Ed. It is to tell the story and advocate. So that's why I say
I'm just cognizant of Mr. Mancusi's
I-
ridiculous amount.
as much as I am, and we're sitting here at 10:15.
I don't even care
So,
if there's
I
any
agree.
more on the IEP than yours already done. I'm just talking about the enrollment piece longitudinally.
Yes.
If you just want to do that and doesn't have to do anything else on the
Yeah.
IEP part. If he
That's what
doesn't
I
have
just said.
time, yeah.
I'm interested in it, but like you said, to your point, it could be better for us and not Board of Finance, but I think it's an important piece. That's just me.
I could just say quickly, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from. I wouldn't want to put too much information on because, you know, the kind of, to Chair's point, I think they're just looking at space constraints and
Yeah.
at that level.
Top level.
And we're always contextualizing the decisions that we make and our conversations. It comes up all the time at budget. You've seen that year in and year out. And so they can always ask us for additional detail on a specific question. I don't know that we can know them under right now.
I think it's just a venue for you're asking for input, so I'm kind of similar to what I would do in finance committee, I would throw it out like that narrative I find important, I would, once again.
And you're not wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong at all. I think
Yeah.
you're right on.
Mr. Krasnoff.
On the next one, just monitors,
Can you give us a number?
number 8.
Did we finish 7?
Well,
Oh, I did.
We not put needs on a Excel spreadsheet that.
Well, we're going through this now.
I thought we finished 7. I apologize.
I think that for number 7, Nick, if you, the
Trying to watch
instructions for
the last
state
little-
funding will be covered in answer number
They're getting beat.
1 and when number 4, when we do the chart,
Okay.
it'll become like C answer to number 3 or whatever. You know what I mean?
They're really.
I just think we should add the 26% thing to as well. So I can redo that.
Okay, so back to 8. I just think we maybe need to add some clarity that we're gonna work in conjunction with whatever the town decides to do with it. Cause it's not really clear in this, but we also learned something new today. What do you guys think?
I'm sorry.
The long-term plan from Mona Terrace, Mr. Gerber.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Number E, I was thinking maybe we add, kind of working conjunction with you guys to figure out if there's a long-term plan. So right now, we didn't really have much information to go off, to be very honest.
Just read the question to him, David.
The question was, provide the fiscal and feasibility analysis of alternate Dwight ECC options considered by the BOE. As part of, include the following scenarios. If were not analyzed, please indicate why. And the first one is renovating Mona Terrace as a long-term solution. And we had put our reasoning under the auspice of what we knew, what would be given to us at the time. But I feel now we have a little more information. Revise that.
I recall our tour that day vividly, and I have to say, my expectation was that we were going to do more substantial renovation than possibly have that as a long-term solution. So when it came back as sort of a paper over kind of renovation, I was surprised because I think that space could be a really good space for the BOE.
One of,
But it needs to be, I know some people disagree, but I would like to at least explore whether that could be BOE space.
one of the issues we left the tour feeling was the inability to use certain spaces were kind of not.
Everything's on the
100%
table with
clear.
that regard. Maybe it wasn't clear, but we could clarify it. Like, that's the kind of thing I would urge you
Back
not
up.
to.
You told us specifically the spaces we would not be allowed to use.
I'm sorry.
The 3 offices that social services are using. So that's why we would need to build speech, psych and soc.
Well, if I did,
Okay.
I don't remember the discussion. I think we had multiple potential uses of that space. And I recall at the time, like not knowing what your intentions for that space are, but things have changed. If there's a big gap in the cost of Dwight, doing it ECC and without ECC, I would say that for the amount of money, if that gap could be, that could be reallocated within the FEMA cap, and you could have a really nice ECC.
Within the FEMA cap. So meaning you're not looking to actually flood proof the property, but put money into the property.
No, and that property is never,
There are some board members I will
So
say
then-
that have concern about that.
well, their board member, I mean, that property, as far as I know, has never been wet. So even through Sandy, so there are factors that I know my colleague wants to jump in on, so I'll let her.
I'm not
but-
gonna, I mean, you know what, I would just encourage looking at past studies on that and just getting, even though it may not have flooded, it is still in a floodplain.
We can model flooding for
And I
that
think
property.
it is still in a floodplain, and there are certain parameters I believe the state is going to require us to submit to them
For reimbursement,
for reimbursement.
right?
We won't get reimbursement there.
Well, yeah. So whatever the
So
numbers are, it's
just-
again, it's like you gotta put it all on paper and actually do the work and the analysis and not you. I mean.
Well, okay, so let me just back up. We did have many conversations on this property, as a temporary location. Instead of sending children out of our town, should McKinley get to a situation where we need to move them, into the Stratfield, which is the whole point of that ECC movement. However, the conversations that we did have were around this property was temporary only. Some of it was the limiting factors that we had been told. But there was some strong feelings, about not wanting to put any money into that building, right, at all. But we had already had that ECC money on the waterfall anyway, so it's not like it was detracting from another capital project or whatnot. So I don't know what kind of money you're talking about.
Well, I'd expected,
I know that given the needs of our other buildings in town, if that was town bonding and you were improving Mona Terrace with that, that might be something to talk about. But if it was going to change our capital needs for all of our boilers and roofs and air conditioning projects, for me, that would be probably a high.
bid bonding and town bonding are the same bonding and it's the same debt level.
Not when we're being told we have to move things around, right? So it's not, I mean, I understand what you're saying, the whole.
You have to move things around based on need.
Right.
For us as a town.
So I would say, for me personally, I wouldn't be putting millions of dollars into Mona Terrace. That would be.
So I need to know why, because we need to prove that out, because I was expecting a $3.5 million ask. And when I got a $600,000 ask, I was really surprised by that. So there was I just think that, like we were saying before about everything else, it shouldn't be a feeling thing unless those feelings can be backed by.
Feeling thing would be like.
Let's write it all down.
That would probably be, it doesn't have air, right? That would be.
Right, there's a lot of things.
That's not a feeling, that's a fact.
No, but it's a feeling that you think it's not worth putting here. Like, we need to write it all down and do the work.
Oh, I didn't.
Just like Giant Steps. That property not only does not have air, it's like a haunted house right now. It doesn't mean
Yes,
we can't
it
convert
is.
that into.
You wouldn't be
really-
able to put under the FEMA cap.
That's the problem.
HVAC.
I'm sorry, what?
You wouldn't be able to put HVAC in that building under the FEMA cap.
I don't know if that's true,
That was the issue we came from with Art.
but I don't know if anyone's ever done a study on that. Like, I tried to find the old study online at Angela's.
Not online, but yeah. we
I
have-
couldn't find it. There's an old study on that, but let's do the work. If it gets eliminated, it gets eliminated. I get it.
Ms. Risa.
Yeah, I just want to chime in because you mentioned, I happen to be one of those board members that has been against Mona Terrace for years because I was under the assumption that we would not be able to do even a phased renovation to make it what we needed. But to your point and to your credit, what you're saying now, because I have never actually seen a true study, knowing that if we're willing to put kids in it now without HVAC, why wouldn't we be willing to put them in without HVAC for 5 more years with temporary solutions if we did it in a phased approach? If we're talking about a phased approach over time, then that, and potentially it working, and then it becoming, and dropping the need for putting an ECC at Jennings and Dwight, if we could fit, if we could fit that through this parallel study I'm asking for from the town. If that were the case, even in a multi-phase project, I still think it would be millions less than adding ECCs at those 2 other schools.
And you would want to factor in the thing that.
And it would mean phased projects. It would mean over time. And it wouldn't,
Depends on what you
We need a heck of a lot of walkers instead of getting
Right.
us.
New East Jennings and Dwight will not be comparable to a not new Oldfield.
We
So
can
it
raise,
Talks about what
I'm
facility.
talking about how we can service the kids in a safe and healthy way, in the most fiscally responsible way, so we can continue to do all of the projects on our waterfall. And if this is a possible way to do that, I don't want to dismiss it without looking into it.
Yeah, I
As
understand.
Mr. Gerber
we don't
said,
need to figure it out now, but we should be committed to actually trying to figure it out.
that's the point I'm making.
All right, Mrs. Wood.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Is that okay through the chair to Mr. Gerber? Are you talking about the entirety of Mona or just still that Giant Steps location? Are you talking
I
about
would say initially, I'm talking about the,
Giant Steps portion?
I'm talking about.
Child's
Child's Garden. Oh my God, I'm sorry.
The Child's Garden
I'm sorry.
component of it. And you know what? If I said to somebody, yes, that Julie DeMarco would like to use a room for part of that, I don't think anyone should be saying that means we can't use the room. Like, that's just something that I said.
I just think it's important to clarify to Mr. Ace's point that if the entirety of that building is available that's a very different conversation than what happened at that tour.
Someday, because it's not an ideal space for a senior center. So if you get that portion of it done under the FEMA cap, you then have something that could be, in my opinion, a phenomenal neighborhood school again. So like, we can work through the details. It may not work. But, we've been talking about this for decades. No one's ever been able, that I know, has ever been able to nail down why that thing wasn't a school, like why we gave it up at all. And so, I know there's differing opinions on whether it's in a flood zone or not. We're gonna have to hire somebody to do some modeling, but.
It was looked at and there was estimates for all the work that needed to be done. There's an underground oil tank leak. There's environmental testing that would have to be done. Like, all the windows have to, it's been rejected so many times because of the work that needed to be done.
Okay, but to be clear, it was rejected to be renovated as an entire elementary school.
Yeah.
That is
Raised
not
5
what we're
feet.
talking about doing here. When you change the charge, we can't say we've already done the work. This is a completely different
We would have the
use.
same standards as a public school, whether it's pre-K or.
In terms of the amount of the building that we would be taking over, it's not the same project. And so the information we had in the past, I'm not saying it's useless, but this is a new and different project that we're looking at.
I don't think a lot of it would be different, but I see what you're saying. Depending on if you're not,
Maybe, right.
your point is that it's not
Right,
the
let's
whole
look at it.
building versus a part of it. Right.
I'm not gonna say I know I have the answers, because I don't. I just feel really in the dark about that, and I have for like 15 years or longer.
We can shed some light. Mr. Lee,
I think that information changes the whole way that we're looking, right? When we're talking about this Dwight and ECC situation, you're saying that whole building's available.
I'm not saying it's available right now.
No, but X amount of time, because it's gonna take time. We're not
I
taking.
feel the seniors deserve something different. That is more like our senior center in par with other towns. So, I mean, there's work they would have.
If we come back with something that fits into what we're looking to do, are you thinking we come back to you in 2 years, because realistically, potentially 2 or 3 years, that's where our plan could be.
it's gonna be more.
I would say for ECC, it could work. I think we could make it work for that part of the building. I mean, obviously we can. That isn't a heavy lift, I don't think. I don't know. It
That's
doesn't,
not the equivalent space of Jennings and Dwight, right? So it's it's a much smaller space.
it's got a huge plate. It's got a lot of
Sorry, so it's-
positive.
I think the fundamental point, just to go back to actually our agenda item, we don't need to solve this problem right now. But this discussion is illustrating that we need to have a broader investigation of this option. And I think that can be reflected in our answer.
It's not done. Can we just put like engraved in some sort of Fairfield marker, do not look here again? Because, right, I mean, at some point, how many
I'm with-
generations are
I'm
gonna
with-
look at all?
I'm with
No, you're right.
Kelly on this. This is a different project.
And then, so more onto what I was saying, the next one is adding a second floor to Dwight. Just heard this evening, that's not possible. I would love to strike that. The answer. Then other sites, you did go into detail on NSS, expanded some of the other stuff, but,
I apologize, Mr. Crowe. I've lost my place.
so we're on page 4, midway through.
Gotcha.
Then, number 9,
Oh, so that's not possible.
number 9 also kind of becomes similar to what we were discussing.
You study?
The one I really wanted to point out, and maybe someone has stuff for the, I was gonna skip to 11. I think it was one thing we really didn't discuss at all in this meeting, and I think it was one thing kind of overlooked. And I'm really glad you put it in. It's done, it was really important to have here. We weren't just looking to do Dwight, right? This, we were looking to do Dwight to possibly move some CLCs to open up space at other schools. So hopefully all the town bodies understand that renovating Dwight where it is, yes, it works. Yes, we might be able to fit what we have now there. However, it will not solve some issues at Hill Hill, Osborne Hill, where else, McKinley.
Right.
We really need enough space to be able to move some of these seals.
Questions, I'll follow up is that they look, we're very isolationist in nature, right? Like the spreadsheet kind of feel to it, rather than the educational components and how we were addressing issues across the district. So I actually like this answer in terms of trying to explain some of that. I would, backing up one, I would break down those costs, so, because it was, we have those, so. I'm doing, because at this point, what we have is that MOU from the town, really. And at this point, those were the costs associated with what we were gonna be doing at that point, so I think we should leave those in. What else? Get up.
Yep.
But the point is, this is gonna be opened into a Google Doc.
Yeah, I'm gonna make some of the changes that were made here
Another,
and we'll put in the doc and then. So feel free.
Yeah.
like, oh, this.
To still do a Google Doc?
I don't feel like
thought
I-
we went through and.
I do because I would want to see some of the feedback of my fellow board members because I don't agree with everything I heard here. I just didn't want to prolong the meeting.
So can I ask a question that, Ms. Maxinelli?
Yep.
Would it be best to redraft the answers based on what it was assumed to be the feedback tonight? And then do the Google Doc against that?
Then will we have another special meeting then?
No, I'm just,
To review.
hold on, my question.
revise the answers?
No, this was plenty.
Well, no, but if.
I will give you,
other
I'll give you a very isolated,
Oh.
you know, microcosm answer. We talked about North Stratfield, and again, if there are architectural reasons for that, not having ECC at North Stratfield, but to say that we're not doing it because of geography, when as a case, because I will tell you one thing that I found very compelling months ago, you know, was Mrs. Flynn speaking about the traffic issues, and I know of them in theory, but I'm not there in the morning, and knowing what is faced at Jennings and with Fairfield Woods. So the thought that North Stratfield might be a better ECC option than Jennings, I would want information about that. I'm not saying to replace Dwight. I'm saying it might be a better option than Jennings. Now, maybe there's an architectural reason, site plan reason not to do that. But that would be something in here that was an answer that this board never discussed and that I would want information on. So I wouldn't want it being listed as an answer of we've eliminated this option when we have done no such thing.
Could we
I can
incorporate,
change that and
More like
say that it'll be
consideration.
part of his.
can we
parallel
incorporate that
study.
and say that that would become part of?
I don't know. So I don't know what this is gonna look like the next
It might be-
iteration.
Gotcha.
It might be summarized at each site possibly as like a summarization of issues or possibilities at each site. So Sherman possibly not, you know what I'm saying? Like,
So it all depends on how it's written. I agree with you. I agree with
Alright,
you. It just,
Yeah, let me reword some of this. I think knowing that we're gonna endeavor with the town on a couple of tracks with Dwight and one with
something totally different.
something,
As long as they approve it.
as long as they approve it,
Mr. Gerber,
possibility
Mrs. Vitale?
of feasibility study of all our buildings that, well, all our, I don't know if you're gonna get into the middle and high schools, but I think let's start with elementary.
No.
So,
What can we do with?
oh my God.
I just want to circle back to this because I think this was productive and I appreciate it. But that all being said, based on where we're going and what we've done, there's no indication tonight that the timeline for the Dwight project is going to be negatively affected or pushed back based on what we've discussed tonight. Correct?
For the first phase of doing those borings and all, like, I think you move ahead now with that, right? I mean, we
Just
should.
give the money.
I mean,
So
if
there's-
Mr.
so there's-
if Mr. Papa George picked him up, I just want to clarify. The seed money is not, this had no reimbursement, so that's not something that we're looking to get into the state at any point. It's just that keeping on this timeline, does it therefore push everything else out if it's not done by the April timeline, right?
Correct. The state
has to be
will not
done by
fund the
April.
Project until it's fully vetted and funded, then is when we can apply for the state reimbursement for it. Moving forwards with the next phase of design. Ideal at this point, just because it would keep the timeline moving along. So that, because we figure about 12 months from the time we actually start going with the next phase to coming back to the town for funding. So there, as you know, there's 4 to 6 months of this next phase work. And then we would be coming back at the financial summit again, talking about this project, where it is
The fall.
next year.
So it's still on our timeline.
So yeah, I just, any exploratory work and whatnot, pretty much it's gonna have to be wrapped up by, end of March, early April. Right? Is that, because based on Ms. Charlton's answer?
I'm a little confused. You're talking about getting reimbursed, what, 20, how much, 20? 6% on $250,000?
No,
Like,
we wouldn't lose something.
You're asking.
No.
It's not that is not reimbursed.
I'm talking about what we've moved forward to you for the seed,
Yeah.
actual seed money, right? You're going to get some initial answers.
right, we need those answers on the site, so we should do it.
I think we understand that.
We've already done it.
We're doing that. I'm talking about the rest of it. Based on Ms. Schultz's answer about end of April.
Is that a target or I'm not sure, is
Yes,
that,
that's a target.
that's a target, but there's nothing that hinges on that, right? I'm missing something.
Reimbursement.
What hinges on April?
Continuing the process moving along.
Just getting it moved along.
Yeah.
But it's not a hard, like, I wasn't sure I understood. It's not like a deadline for
And
filing.
it's a hard, but we would want everything done by April.
For the seed for some.
Funding.
Oh, okay, guys, we need to be clear about something.
I think I was.
Bonding, we have a ton of money in an account. The bonding is what you can authorize and spend before you bond, right? Everyone knows that,
Or
right?
approval, I guess we should say.
Yeah, you can approve and authorize the bonding. And that could happen next year, the year after. I mean, we have the money, right?
Oh, it can't happen next year or the year after. I don't know what.
It's happened in April. To stay on the timeline.
What? I think David Becker should come up. Is that all right? He's the CFO. Like, we approve projects all the time and we spend money in anticipation of doing the bonding in July. Right, so we're not holding up any, yeah. Can David come up and talk about the process?
Yeah, I understand the process.
Oh, okay. I thought, that's why I was confused.
Totally understand the
Okay.
process. I want to make sure we stay on the process, is
Okay.
my point. And not with all of this work. This isn't going to be, in other words, this work isn't going to be a year of work. Right? This is going to be 3-4 months, get the answers that you're looking for. You're going to do these site analysis, we're going to do the borings, and then we're going to move forward.
Can I just, to the question that I put on the floor was, will anything that we've discussed tonight and what we're about to discuss now delay the timing of building, completing Dwight?
It could. If we get certain answers back that are scary and we haven't answered the other things yet, then it will delay what? We need answers on, like, if we get an answer back that the ledge is like.
I get that, but I'm saying, in theory, barring
Hopefully, yeah, it shouldn't. We should start now.
issues that could show up regardless of what we've talked about tonight. Those could have shown up anytime and derailed a project and delayed it, but it still gets done.
But we need alternatives, and if we decide that, well, if it's scary expensive more than 65, let's say it's 85 or whatever, and we haven't gotten answers on the alternatives yet, then I guess they could delay the process, but
The absence of that is my question.
I don't think so. But David, do you have any?
I mean, Ingles can speak more to the reimbursement piece timeline and some of their deadlines on. But just one of the things I think that not always clear is that it's the appropriation piece, the authorization to actually spend the funds. And then the timelines for us to go out and either ban or bond the funds. And we do have we do bond funds and then it takes several years to actually expend them on some of the projects. We're trying to put a lot of out there that we're trying to tighten that up because we want to go out and get exactly what we need and do that. But we do sit on a fair amount of money that if necessary, if you have an authorization and it happened to come in August for seed money and it was going to take a period of time, you aren't totally unable to spend any of that money because we just went out to bond and now you have to wait until next year. Obviously, we try to time things accordingly because we want to have that amount. And if we believe in that window, we're going to spend it, that we can either go out and bond or ban. In this instance, we would probably do a shorter term ban and moving forward. So the timeline on that would ideally be that if we do this in the next few months, you come back in the February or March timeline where we're going to do more appropriations. But you can, I would say, go all the way out to the RTM in May and then still get this dropped into our our package that gets put together in, or is finalized in June and goes out when we actually go out to bond or ban.
So from a fiscal perspective, it sounds like that is not slowing us down. What may slow us down is any findings that we would have found anyways if it had gone to a traditional building committee.
So I would like to
Thank you.
just follow up with a little bit of process before, because our meeting has to end at 11 o'clock unless we extend. But how is this all operating? Like, are we meeting tomorrow and you're gonna like send over $250,000? Who's hiring the subcontractors? Like, what's the logistics of this pre-phase, so to speak?
I don't think we figured it out, but we can write something up tomorrow about what our, I mean.
Meaning, are you managing
We just
that?
decided to do this tonight, so.
Yeah, so.
Put me on the spot here.
So you're gonna get the septic guy to go out. You're gonna get the,
Well, in collaboration with Mr. Testani and Mr.
Yeah.
I understand in collaboration. I just wanna, yeah, so we should probably just hammer out the details.
Yeah, we need to hammer out the details and how we're gonna interact with each other, because we're definitely not gonna do this in a vacuum, so, yeah.
Mrs. Vitale?
Just to follow up, just want to give Mr. Papa George just the chance in terms of any other approvals at the state level. This approach, is it, any concerns with it? Speak now or forever hold your
No,
peace.
we understand what town is looking for and should be able to meet the deadlines. My understanding, maybe I'm wrong, I thought the question Mr. Asa was asking was, are we anticipating seeing the seed money on the next agendas now that we've had this conversation for Dwight, so that we can start the next phase of the project? I think, was that kind of, that's what I was.
That's where-
Well, yeah, I mean, now it's with the Board of Selectmen, so whatever they approve and however they charge it is on that, is on them, with hopefully working collaboratively with us.
I think we need to hash through the amount. 250, 400, $1 million, we need to figure that out and what the scope is, what we're asking them.
Yeah, I think it's helpful
Can't
to
really-
understand, what does actually having that authorization afford Mr. Papa George to be able to move forward ahead in terms of forms and documents and things like that? So that's the piece that might be helpful for you to understand a little bit more. Mrs. Vitale?
I think to that, to further that point, because I don't want to stall this either, would just ask Mr. Papa George, Ms. Testani, Ms. Jacobson, whoever you feel with the administration, in terms of that charge and making sure that what the town wants to accomplish and keeping it on schedule to move this project forward is aligned. I asked Mr. Gerber that this board, be on the next Board of Selectmen agenda for discussion. I think a lot of the points, and we discussed a lot of the stuff that I would hope to discuss at that meeting. I do think that we should fill in Ms. Kupchik in terms of some of the things that move forward, but I would hope that we would get the charge worked out and hopefully moving forward on this work. So I think that it sounds like we just are all on the same page in terms of what.
We'll work through the details tomorrow. I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I would like to just offer the opportunity for public comment if someone wants this. It is on this agenda, and we only have a few minutes left. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, and we'll
Thank you.
certainly follow up. Public comment? Hi.
Lauren Efren, 241 First Street. Dwight, president, second year, Board of Ed rep for RLMS, second year, P-TECH representative for both schools. First of all, thank you to the Board of Ed for providing a safe space for all these questions and topics to be discussed. Thank you to the Facilities Committee once again for all the hard work, effort that went into not only the long-range facilities plan, but reviewing every single property that is currently online and within your charge for the next 10 years. Dwight and Jennings among them. I'm glad that we're all in agreement that Dwight needs to be addressed, not shut. About 2 years ago, even 2 months ago, it wasn't universally agreed upon that it needed to even be addressed. It does. My concern, even though I appreciate Mr. Asa's point that nothing we're discussing here could possibly delay whatever is decided on or just moving forward, right? To Mr. Gerber's point, something scary may come up. My fear, my concern, something scarier would happen in that meantime, not from now to 6 months from now, whenever this phase of the project is done. But the last thing I think anyone in this room wants is to delay this process so long that we skip the possibility for bonding. We throw out 87 different possibilities for an ECC. And what we're arguing over is essentially 9,000 square feet of space that is needed desperately for a new ECC. I personally don't care where it goes. And I am a Dwight parent. But it's 9,000 square feet of space. That's what this is. That to me seems like an awful waste of time and resources and money when you have 30 acres and a level plot to be able to build on. And reimbursement if you add it on to an elementary school. So I have to say it is concern that we are delaying the legitimate needs, the health and safety of Dwight students, of ECC students, and several of the overcrowded schools in our district. I would like to also just address that this has been on a capital waterfall for 20 plus years. None of these numbers should be a surprise to anyone. 20 years ago, there was a brand new building.
Have to just wrap it up if you can.
Sure. $13.4 million, I believe. You're now 20 years later. Numbers have risen. We've gone through a pandemic. We've seen everything. Everything increased. The longer you wait, the more this will cost. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. Thank you for participating. Pardon? I'm gonna take a motion. Is Mr. Asa seconded by?
Sorry, I didn't bring one over.
Mr. Lee? All in favor?
No one, if you want.
We're adjourned.
I told him to disrupt.